Thank you so much for joining us this morning. We have the next 90 minutes to conduct this interview for your application. We're going to start off by introducing ourselves, and we would like you to introduce yourself as well. And then we will get into how the interview is going to run. So I'll ask Beth to kick off.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Hi. Beth Sealing. I am in from Illinois today, temporarily, until I move back down to where you guys are. I am here as an independent consultant, which I've been doing for about the last, 4 or 5 years. And prior to that, was an authorizer myself in Chicago Public Schools, and then started my work in this field on the operator side at KIPP Foundation, where I did expansion and kind of strategic growth stuff with KIPP for several years.
My name is Rebecca Cass, most recently with the Managing Director of the Excel Academy Charter School Network in Boston, Massachusetts. Prior to that, I worked for NACSA full-time and had also worked for the Department of Education's Charter School Office in Massachusetts.
I'm Tommy Henderson. I currently am a professor at Mississippi College in the Educational Leadership Department. I have 37 years in public school education. And I retired as superintendent of Clinton Public School District, which was the highest performing district in the state when I got there and when I left, and it's close now. I have a great interest in charter schools, and I've actually had students in my classes who are now teaching in Reimagine Prep.
That's great.
My name is Kimberly Dorsey. I am a professor at Mississippi University for Women in the College of Business. Currently teaching for a great length of time now courses like operations management and strategic management. As far as my connection, or my closest connection with public education, public school education, I grew up with my father as school superintendent for 20 years and have watched that process up close and personal, and also have children who are now a part of the public school system in the state of Mississippi.
Where was he the superintendent?
Holmes County.
Okay, that's great.
Holmes County, Mississippi.
I'm going to go to the back of the room to have Marion and Aaron introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Marion Shetty. I'm the Executive Director of the Mississippi Charter School Authorizer Board.
Hi everyone, I'm Erin Reddy Weedman-Stipps. I'm the National Association of Charter School Authorizers based out of Chicago.
Great.
I'm Kelsey Lambrecht. I work for Collegiate Academies, and I will be the founding school leader in Baton Rouge, opening not this fall, but a year from now.
Kelsey, could you say a little bit about what you've done the last few years?
Yep. This is the 6th year I've worked for Collegiate. I started off teaching special education at Sci Academy and founded one of our special programs there for students with moderate to severe intellectual disabilities, and then continued my work with Collegiate as a director of intervention and helped to build out and expand our intervention programming services. And then last year was an assistant principal at one of our schools.
Good morning. I'm Riley Kennedy. I also work at Collegiate Academies. My title is the Chief of Staff. Until this year, that meant a variety of things, including finance, operations, and all of our external affairs. So anything that's non-academic, that's relevant to our network and our growth in our schools. And now more focused on external relations and community affairs.
Good morning. My name is Adam Hoff. I've been consulting for Collegiate Academies for about 1.5 years now, working on organizational development and growth and expansion. And I previously was an assistant superintendent at the State Department of Education in Louisiana and a deputy superintendent at the Recovery School District, working on as an authorizer and other things. And our CEO, Ben Markovitz, apologizes he can't be here today. We actually have one school that's already in its first week, and our other 2 schools have their first day Monday. So we thought that his time was better spent doing observations and coaching today.
Just wanted to apologize. I'm going to be charged with taking notes, so I'm over here furiously typing, not searching Amazon.
All right, excellent. Well, thank you so much for joining us. So all the members of the team in front of you today have read your application in its entirety and have met and have from that generated a series of questions that we want to ask you today for the next 90 minutes, really to corroborate the information that is in the application, as well as assess the group's capacity to deliver on the plan as presented. So that is how we are going to conduct the interview. We'll use the next 70 minutes or so to ask some questions that came out of our review of that application, and then leave time at the end for any last remarks that you all might want to make, as well as to discuss next steps. Sounds good?
Awesome.
Okay, great. Let's kick off and want to hear more from Collegiate Academies about what is the vision for the organization? Where do you see the organization going over the next 5 years? And then in particular, where does expansion into Mississippi fit into that growth plan?
You open answer?
Yeah, go ahead.
Great.
Sure.
Okay, sure. So I assume you're talking about numbers of schools and students and all of that. Is that what you mean?
No, just where's the organization going? What's its growth? What's
Sure,
its
okay.
plan?
I'm
What's
just
its
confirming
vision for the future?
The vision of Collegiate Academies is to prepare young people to be successful in and beyond college, to be successful in life, and to serve all young people, to meet them where they are and to prepare them for tremendous academic growth. And that's about meeting the needs of young people, students with disabilities, and otherwise wherever they may be. And really, that's the vision, much more than anything about the number of schools or the number of students. So I just wanted to be clear. I think in terms of organizational growth, right now we have approximately 1,480 students in New Orleans, all in Orleans Parish, across 3 campuses. Our plan over the next 5 years is to expand to approximately 7 or 8 schools, approximately, this is all, there's some variation here, perhaps 3,500 students. And the idea is that at 3,500 students, we will likely have achieved a level of financial sustainability and economies of scale and expertise within what we are thinking of as one region broadly. By that we mean the fundamental core central office where it is today in New Orleans, and schools in New Orleans, in Baton Rouge, and potentially in Jackson, Mississippi. And the pace at which we would get there is a function, first and foremost, of the health of our existing schools. That is the primary driver of any expansion or non-expansion. We have a commitment to the families, communities, and scholars we serve today, and that drives us above all. The second consideration would, of course, be the pipeline of school leader fellows, individuals like Kelsey, who are ready, willing, and able to launch high-quality schools and create and deliver on future commitments to future scholars, families, and communities. And right now, we anticipate that our schools as they exist today and our pipeline of school leader fellows should allow us to open, on average, 1 school a year over the next 5 years, which would bring us to approximately that 8-school number. I think it is, really important to say this, though, and it's very reflective, I think, of organizational culture and DNA, generally speaking, the thought that the obligation to we take very seriously the commitments that we make to our stakeholders, to families, to scholars, to communities, and we are not in any way interested in growing faster than is right for our stakeholders. And we are certainly not in a place where we will ever consider ourselves beholden to grow at a certain time or in a certain way because we received funding or because we received a charter or anything of that nature. We're going to make conservative, cautious, realistic decisions that preserve our focus on the students we currently serve. That's what we've done historically, and that's what we'll continue to do in the future.
So why Mississippi? How does Mississippi fit into that? Why are you here today?
I think it's really straightforward. So as we look at other geographies, we really think about three major things. So first, there's a question of need. We want, we're not doing this to, to make money or gain political power or for any other sort of reason. We're doing this work because we want to find and serve young people who benefit from our approach. And so we look nationally, of course, at the need, and then we think about that need or that opportunity as maybe both in terms of numbers of young people who would benefit, who don't currently have the opportunity to attend high-quality open enrollment public high schools. And we also think about kind of like a proof point effect, which is to say that all things being equal, a community where there is a high number of young people who would benefit from a good high school model, if that community doesn't currently have many or any positive proof points of schools that really bring in all young people, serve all young people, and hold them to high levels of expectations and lead them to success, then we have a kind of a double desire to go there, because one, we want to go there to serve, the 500, the 1,000. We want to serve the young people that we'll have the chance to serve, but also we want to have the second order sort of ripple effect of creating a proof point and driving change for the rest of the city. And to a large degree, speaking as, when Collegiate was part of my portfolio as an authorizer, that's a lot of what Psi Academy did in New Orleans. Psi Academy, made change for the young people it served, but more importantly, in my opinion, perhaps more importantly, it also drove system change because it changed the behavior of funders and authorizers. Having seen a proof point of high school success caused government and others to raise their expectations for other high schools. So that's the first. That's, need is broadly defined. Second, we think about structural conditions. So are the structural conditions in a given place appropriate relative to funding, facilities access, the legal climate, the political climate, human capital? Those are, pretty straightforward things. And our assessment is that the conditions in Mississippi are not ideal, but they are we believe that they meet our current needs. I think we have questions about the most recent SPLC lawsuit and all of things that are dynamic. Then the third is we take really seriously the execution risk, and like I said, the commitments we make to families, and so we think really cautiously about what is the likely impact of expanding into a new place on the schools we currently operated. And it's been our conclusion that opening schools in places like Baton Rouge and Jackson, which are an easy drive from New Orleans, is a safer, lower risk, and more responsible way to expand than to do some sort of across the country kind of. We've seen CMOs go from California to Tennessee or whatever it may be, and generally speaking, expansions that have not stayed within kind of concentric circles of closeness have really struggled, whether that's cultural context, whether that's because it's difficult to have people flying back and forth, whether it's because you have to have a duplicative central office. But all of that to say, Jackson, Mississippi has clear need, has an opportunity to be a proof point, has structural conditions that generally speaking seem to be amenable to our model. And finally, it's our perspective, and the only way that we would come here would be, our perspective that we can come here without unduly or inappropriately taking our focus away from the schools and the communities that we currently serve.
I would just add from my own perspective, and I've worked at Collegiate Academy, Psi Academy since it was created, and I feel particularly personally drawn to Jackson. This is where my husband grew up. My in-laws live down the road here, and I grew up very close to Mississippi, just right on the border in Clinton, Louisiana. And my mother-in-law is a professor, so I feel like a personal connection to the city and to the state. Period. And my mother-in-law's professor was at Jackson State, at Millsaps, Belhaven, so lots of different schools around here, and she would frequently comment on the differing levels of preparedness that students would have coming into her math classes. And I think what we do that is the thing that we do. We don't, there's nothing like particularly fancy about what we do. It's just very at the baseline, taking kids no matter where they are and accelerating their growth and really focusing on their growth rather than some absolute point, which the absolute point is also very important, but just meeting them where they are and putting them on a growth trajectory that they could never have imagined or would never have imagined for themselves, and just really pushing them beyond what they thought that they could do. Just like actually Kelsey's particularly gifted. I think all of our school leaders are. So that's just a little
makes sense. You talked about concentric circles and the proximity from Jackson to New Orleans. True, but it's not down the street, right? So what changes or adaptations would the network need to make in order to really support a school here in Jackson?
I think that, at a minimum, we will need to have some central staff here. And our thinking, we have, we constructed a budget as part of a business plan and a federal CSP application that incorporates our intended expansion in both Baton Rouge and Jackson, and we envision at least 2 or 3 central staff people who are on the ground in Jackson, which I think is pretty straightforward. But more importantly, I think what I would say is that we are this coming fall 2017, with Kelsey School in Baton Rouge, will be our first time having a school that is further than maybe 4.5 miles, 3.5 miles.
Even.
Not even, yeah. Further than 2 or 3 miles away from our other schools. And I think that in many respects, Kelsey's voyage is going to be a pilot year where we watch closely and learn carefully what exactly a school in another city needs in terms of academic and operational supports. I think that we've built the capacity at our central office in terms of staffing and expertise to support schools in multiple geographies, but what that should actually look like operationally. So do we think about people, do people come back and forth? Do people come and get trained centrally? Does Central push out to the field? I think that's, it would be dishonest to say that we know how we're going to do that. And I'd say that that's probably perhaps the best element, I think, of collegiate academies, like organizational strategy, which is to be a learning organization, to be humble, to be adaptive, and to come into things with a very high set of expectations for ourselves, but an open mind and a plan to be adaptive and see what the situation seems to hold. It's also worth saying the way we work with our school leader fellowship is that we don't formally identify. We don't sit here today saying, for fall 2018, we're 100% certain which of our school leader fellows would be the person that we would seek to launch the school. And so I think that there's some space between now and then where we will have to see, given the likely leader, what are their needs, what are their strengths, what are their weaknesses, and we would think about both structural and non-structural supports that we would provide. We would think about those in some part as a function of our leaders' needs.
Are you planning for central office staff to be based in Baton Rouge to support your school?
Not currently.
Okay. Jackson would be a different scenario. And do you have any hypothesis yet about what type of staff support might be more important to have locally versus regionally?
Yeah.
2 or 3 positions?
Yeah, I think it comes to a question of what is centralized organizationally. And, generally speaking, we're talking about, generally speaking, we have a structure where academics is most tightly centralized. And I think that it is more logical to think that something like talent, clearly community affairs and engagement, those are things that would be much more likely to be localized. And it is worth noting that from an operations and finance perspective, like the structure of our schools is to have a strong director of finance and operations, just like a director of curriculum instruction, just like a director of intervention. These are, school-based positions that have a high level of kind of like agency and empowerment. They receive, of course, coaching and support from the managing director of operations and finance, who's a former DFO himself, from our sort of central level academic and special education intervention people, but they are school-based leaders. So to some degree, it's a question of how do people participate in network-wide professional development? I think it's a very good question. It's something that we'll need to figure out. And then also, how do people get their, physically, how do they get their coaching and support? So is some portion of it, video chat or telephonic? Is it about going back and forth? But I think the basic things that we do that you would expect, walkthroughs, rigorous feedback, those sorts of things they don't necessarily require people to be on the ground in the city all the time. And I think there's a clear trade-off that we should measure between where we have people with very, very, very strong expertise. 1 day a week of them might be more valuable than 5 days a week of someone else we would hire.
Ready? Yep. Okay. So let's turn actually to more specific questions about the academic program. So one of the things we would love to have you guys walk us through would be the curriculum development process. And actually, Kelsey, maybe it'd be interesting to hear from you as developing a new school. What will that look like for your staff and for your school? Is a new entity kind of separate from the core region? Like, what's that process look like for curriculum development, and what do you do? What do teachers do?
Yeah, so our curriculum is currently centralized. So it's written by, we have a team of content writers, and then our content writers play a critical. So our content writers supported by network staff, our chief academic officer, and then other network staff people supporting our curriculum writers.
Many of the content writers are teachers.
In fact, all of them.
It's a stipend. It's a stipended
So it's
position.
an additional responsibility.
Yeah. And they get a stipend. They're called course leads or content leads.
Yeah, and they opt into that process and interview for it and whatnot. So the content writers are then supporting teachers as they're teaching them their curriculum. And so we have, as a network, bi-weekly professional learning communities, is what we call them, where we're digging into the content, doing intellectual prep on the content, the next unit plans. So all the teachers teaching English 1 come together every 2 weeks at a minimum, dig into the next unit, talk about what's coming up, get trained on the upcoming content, then they go teach it. Come back 2 weeks later, bring their data, bring their unit assessment data, whatever data was in the cycle, analyze it together, look forward to the next unit, go back and teach. So we have that as a rolling structure with other.
How is that going to work in your school?
Yeah.
Because I'm assuming that's going to
Correct.
be a little bit different than how it has operated in the past.
So Margot and I were talking, Margot's our chief academic officer, and we were talking about that specific question the other day. And to Adam's point, it would be dishonest if I said, we have a plan figured out. Like, we don't. But we will have to explore things like, this data day. So we have quarterly data days where the entire network comes together, a day long of data analysis. It may be a situation where one data day is in New Orleans, one data day is in Baton Rouge, and you switch back and forth, and you have teachers driving an hour for that. But it could also be a situation where we have separate data days with the same structure, same divvying up where network support is, where network staff people are providing their support. So Margot may be here while the math lead may be in Baton Rouge, a system like that. Talked about video conferencing and options like that. So we've talked about a lot of options, but we haven't nailed down specifically what that will look like. I do think an hour, we left at 5 today to get here, like, doable. Leaving Baton Rouge at 7 to get to New Orleans by 8 is also a doable drive for a day of professional development.
One thing that I'd add is that we're currently totally independent of any expansion, because right now all of our schools are in New Orleans. Like, we've currently been actually decentralizing a decent amount of our coaching and actually pushing network level coaching staff either literally to be school-based employees instead, or to be effectively school-based employees who perhaps split their time between 2 schools. And we'll have to see this year. I mean, this is really the nature of our organizational culture, is to say, let's try something, measure the results, and then see what to do. But I wouldn't be surprised if we continue that effort further, which relies obviously on having really great school leaders and directors of curriculum instruction and teacher leaders, but also makes less significant some of the geographic consideration.
Yeah. And I've I've always been a school-based coach, and in my work at Collegiate, I've always coached a fair number of teachers and have been doing that from a school-based perspective as opposed to being on the network team and coaching in schools. And I think what we've found is empowering schools to have quality coaches within them does seem to be a better fit. You know, if I'm the director of curriculum and I'm both reviewing your lesson plans, seeing your lessons in action, and then having the coaching debrief cycle with you, that seems to be a stronger fit that leads to stronger growth, stronger development for teachers than, you know, person on the network team who observes class once or twice a week and has the debrief, but is missing out on the lesson planning cycle or the curricular development that's happening school-based. It just seems to be a stronger fit if schools are truly developed with those skills within themselves. Of course, with the networks of staff supporting content knowledge and continuing development for those coaches, but it does seem to be a stronger fit from our experience.
So that's all really helpful. One more question about the curriculum development piece. Have you thought through how, or if you would need to adapt the current curriculum from Louisiana to Mississippi?
Yeah, so that's a great question because I think that's another difference. The Baton Rouge expansion, we're in the same state, so we're under the same statewide assessments. And our curriculum is currently, it's first and foremost pitched to an ACT college-ready bar, and that is really our ultimate goal, obviously, and primary driver of the decisions that we make. But we do have content-based classes that are EOC end of course classes. And so biology is going to align to the Louisiana EOC in terms of the specific content that we know is important. And so I do think I'm not an expertise in Mississippi pupil progression or what courses are statewide tests. And so I do think that would be a difference in terms of how we think about curriculum and the adaptations that will need to be made.
Yeah, and I think absolutely, and I think that's something where if you imagine, a year from now, the future, Kelsey's in, her fellowship year, which is to say this is the year before she opens, and if we were opening a school in fall 2018, the year before, someone else would be in that fellowship, and they would conduct kind of like an auditing process. But it is worth noting, though, Kelsey's point on the ACT, which is that increasingly we are shifting our curriculum and assessment focus away from the peculiarities of the state assessments to focus on a college-ready bar, knowing full well that it will hurt our results on state assessments, but believing that the nationally normed measures of college readiness are actually much better for young people.
Yeah.
And do you envision right now that Margot, as a CAO in Louisiana, would be the person who would be leading the development of a Mississippi-specific curriculum and then working with a school leader, or is that something that would be more school-based because it's so nuanced?
No, it would be someone on Margot's team, and we've added some really significant expertise on Margot's team very recently, but two senior people from the KIPP Foundation and from TNTP, with in particular making a really significant investment in math curriculum and expertise, because we think it's critical so that our scholars don't have to take remedial classes in college, and therefore we believe they'll be more likely to persist. But all of that is to say, it wouldn't literally be our chief academic officer. Our chief academic officer it's a team of, is it 8, 12? Yeah. So she has by far the largest team of our central team. It's a very significant team, and they have within the team more broadly the expertise and capacity, and she would be playing she would have an accountability role in so much as it's on her scorecard. We have scorecards both literally and metaphorically, but it would be on her scorecard, but it would be our our content experts would be working with the school leader fellow.
Can you speak to learning standards as they relate to college readiness? So we got a sense of kind of course requirements, but not necessarily kind of pupil progression standards that indicate to you that a scholar is going to be college ready. Can you give us some examples of those or talk through what that looks like?
So one thing we've been working on is work on foundational skills and mindsets. I think this is going to answer your question, but there may be two sides of it, so you guys feel free to. The foundational skills and mindsets side, So what we've seen, so we have it's called CA Next, our program that sticks with kids essentially through to and through college.
It's like we created like Kip Through College.
Okay.
And so data that we've collected from our alumni indicating, like we're getting them to a place before high school graduation where they have GPA, academic skills, academic standing to gain access to the college that they want to go to. But then persistence data is not yet telling us what we want it and need it to be telling us in terms of kids persisting and sustaining and being successful in college. So what the project we've been working on for the last couple of years has been backwards mapping that data, essentially. So if these are the things that our students are struggling with in college, what are the skills that they're struggling with? How do we pitch a curriculum that starts in 9th grade to develop those skills and mindsets? And we're calling them foundational skills and mindsets, but KIPP calls them character traits. Other schools call them different things. What we're branding them as foundational skills and mindsets. So that's something that we've been working on. Lauren Katz and her team with CA Next this last year did a very large research collaboration, pulling together what other networks have been doing, what other schools have been doing to build out their curriculum over 4 years, combining that with data both from us and other organizations to create what will be a 4-year curriculum. And in terms of that being built out, it's not. I think we're still very much in the beginning process of it, but we will be piloting this year with a 9th and 11th grade curriculum.
So are these more like non-cognitive skills?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's how you could think of it. And so that's why your question may be both
So I
soft
think
skills
what we're
and
also thinking about is like, how do you know at the end of the day, yes, this student has X number of credits or has taken these courses. Like at the end of the day, what's your bar for a student that is ready, college ready from like an academic standpoint?
ACT.
ACT is our primary benchmark for that.
And how is that woven into your curriculum?
Yeah, so when we talk about pitching to an ACT bar, essentially, and part of the shift we're making right now, so our data days used to be like all our specific courses. So if we have 6 9th grade courses, we're going to take our unit plans from the last 9 weeks and analyze the data, aligning that to our end of year goal and how are we on track to reaching that goal. And while we think that's important, what we're realizing is when we look at students' ACT data and we map that with how they're doing in college, what we're realizing is that their EOC performance isn't nearly as illuminating as their reading level and where their reading level is lying and how that influences their ACT performance and how that influences college success. So we will still look at course data. We know that that's important. We also know that a primary driver is reading level, math level, and then how that's going to feed into ACT performance. And we have specific content-specific pieces broken down. That's what are the specific math skills that you need to do well on the ACT, backwards mapping that across our 4 years of math or our 4 years of science or whatever the content specific is. And then we also have junior and senior classes that are specific ACT prep. But I think if getting at how is it woven throughout, I think we try to and are trying to do a more intentional job of looking at those key indicators of what is telling our kids who are persisting and excelling in college, what were the key indicators that preceded that? ACT, cool. The kids who were scoring 24, 25, 26 on ACT, what did we learn about them in their freshman year, their sophomore year, their junior year? What are the key drivers that led them to 25, 26, 27, 28, 30 on the ACT? How do we drive that more in 9th grade, more in 10th grade, more in 11th grade?
I think it would be fair to say that, we judge if we were to think about just specific data points, like the thing that we talk about the most by far in terms of looking at our, graduating classes before we obviously know whether they persist in college is about how are they doing on the ACT. We think that it's reductive, of course, to say one thing, but that's the biggest thing. Then I think conversely or additionally, when we think about our schools overall, judging the success of our schools, we look first and foremost at the Credo data, the Credo out of Stanford University, but the Credo data essentially says how much growth is your population of young people making relative to demographically similar populations of young people? And we have made, we've had consistently by far the most significant credo growth in New Orleans, and substantially outstripping that of essentially any other charter network nationally. Not because we're getting our students where we want them to be in terms of absolute achievement, but because we're serving a population of ninth graders that comes in so low academically, and we make really significant growth with them.
Do I have time for one more academic question?
Sure.
Should we move? Okay, so we read a little bit about the mental health supports that are available to your students as a connection to an academic intervention and helping them thrive. Can you just tell us, we're interested to hear more about that.
Yeah.
Good question.
So every team founds with a director of mental health services. So that's a staple in terms of what we consider a founding team. So that would be either a social worker or a counselor, and also look for someone with experience, skill, potential for adult leadership, because as we connect it to the academic performance, a big thing that's essential for this to happen is for teachers to be well versed in working with kids who have experienced trauma, or understanding a student's behavior intervention plan and how that impacts classroom performance, how to execute that inside a classroom. And so we ask a lot of teachers in terms of what we ask them to know about students' individual plans, but we pair that with a lot of support and training that comes from the director of mental health services, or comes from another school social worker or counselor that's working in the school that is doing professional development with teachers on a really regular basis, practicing strategies, and even just practicing the basics of, okay, you work with 20 kids who have specific plans that are just in the mental health or behavior intervention realm. And so let's actually practice like memorizing who those students are, what are the specifics of their plans, and pairing that with other devices to help teachers put that into action in a really real sense in the classroom.
So from a student's perspective, what does it look, a student who needs supports, what does that look like?
Yeah, so if a student's behavior intervention plan calls for specific things like preferential seating, or that's the one that's coming to mind first, preferential seating, that student is going to be sure to get those things when he or she is in class. We also provide, our social workers or counselors are providing counseling throughout the day, so students would have their sessions, of course. Does that answer the student experience?
I just wanted examples of.
Yeah, I think the things that have been mapped out is going to best serve the student in the class. Those things are happening in the class, and teachers are well trained in what those things are, well practiced in executing those things.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Kelsey, you had spoken about some of the programs you've begun in the special education area. Can you share with us about how the program is managed and, overseen by someone within the school?
Yeah, definitely. So I think big picture, when we think about intervention services at our schools, we think about it as an intervention model, meaning it's not taking the IEP, how many minutes should this kid have of special education services? Okay, cool, let's make sure those minutes happen. We know those minutes are important, and we make sure those minutes happen, but thinking more broadly, we know there are kids without IEPs who have substantial needs as well. We know that minutes on an IEP don't indicate need. So thinking first, what are the individual kids' needs? So then that has led to a very robust set of options, including special programs like Essential Skills, which is what I started, and intervention services, which would be non-special education minutes. These would be general education minutes, like a pre-algebra class, when the rest of the class may be taking algebra. But in terms of site at the school. So there's a director of intervention on any founding team as well. And so that person is driving the programming, driving the scheduling of the interventions and the programs, doing that in collaboration with the director of curriculum and instruction, which really operates as an assistant principal in our model, very closely connected to driving the academic side, but then also very closely connected with the work of the school leader and driving that together. One thing, so I've worked on the network side of things with our intervention curriculum and worked with our director of scholar support services on the network side of things. And one thing that we have prioritized over the years is empowering school leaders to be well versed in what the data of their special programs means, what are the critical data points that they need to be monitoring and driving through their directors of intervention with their directors of curriculum and instruction, so that it's not this case of, oh, the director of intervention or the SPED chair is taking care of it, but so it's a situation where the school leader is truly coaching the director of intervention and understanding the data and students' performance and what a special classroom should look like, what an intervention classroom should look like, so that the school leader is able to drive those things as well. So building their expertise, empowering the school leader themselves to be a driver of that, what they want to see in those spaces and what needs to happen in those spaces.
So would you say it's the building principal that's responsible for making the decisions, or is it done in collaboration with the intervention director?
What sorts of decisions?
About special ed.
Yeah. I would say the school leader is the ultimate for the building. A lot of that is going to happen in collaboration with another position. But when our director of scholar support services rolls up data, that goes to the school leader. That is the school leader's data, the school leader's responsibility for the success of their programs and the students within them.
And it is worth noting that in New Orleans, each of our charter schools is its own local education agency. And so technically, vis-a-vis the state and the federal government and everything else, each school leader truly does have individual building level responsibility and ownership. It isn't simply that we are making it as if it's that case in an effort to empower and decentralize, which perhaps we would, but it is literally Sci Academy as opposed to Carver Collegiate. They're separate local education agencies, and there is kind of like a buck stops here, the buck stops here, with both the state and federal government for IDA dollars, provision of services, FAPE, all of those things. And that's the case for all Type 5. In Louisiana, all Type 5 charter schools and all Type 2 charter schools are each at the school level their own local education agency.
And the population, too, at our schools is about 20%.
It's very high.
It's very high of students with IEP, so it would be very difficult for a school leader to say, okay, take, a fifth of my population and have somebody else go and direct their instruction. It's very much a part of the school as a whole.
All right, well, what about the ELL students? How do you manage that program?
Good question.
Yeah. So our programming has always been really responsive to the needs of our students in our building. And so there was a time where we actually didn't have any English language learners in our schools. When one of our schools was in its third year, pretty much overnight they acquired 30% of their students.
30% of one of their grades and about 15% overall.
Became a population needing these services, and it very much happened overnight. And what the school did, which I think typifies our approach to our students' needs, is they rallied and they figured out how they were going to meet those needs. So overnight built an English language learning program for their students. As a base across our schools, we have an ESL chair for each school that is supporting the needs, ensuring communication benchmark baselines are met in terms of these are the communication things we know need to happen, we know we need to have in place, interpreters, interpreted paperwork, those sorts of things. So we have that on our checklist for our DFOs for beginning of year setup. We have a chairperson working specifically, case managing specifically for students who need English language learning services. And then our director of intervention also plays a critical role in, just like this person would think about what are the accommodations, modifications that a student with an IEP would need in a general education setting or in any of their courses. The DI is also English language learners or students with an LAP are on that person's scorecard as well. So performance of a student, an ELL student, needs to be the same as the performance of a student who is not in that bucket, and looking at that data, working with teachers similarly with accommodations, modifications in class that need to happen to make sure that that data, the performance is the same across those buckets.
How would you, you get a student level 1, level 2, low ELL, what's your theory of change? Like, what's the program that you're building to help that student acquire language acquisition skills?
Yeah. And again, I think it depends on what the needs of, so is there one student or are there 10? And that may make the decisions different programmatically. It could be, we have this number of level 1 learners and we know we need to have an ESL class. So we have a curriculum ready to go for this ESL class to happen, 1 period a day. And then we pair that with, okay, here's the case manager for these 7 students, these 10 students. Case manager is responsible for monitoring performance in every single class. So daily checking how they do with their grades, with their exit slips, exit tickets. Monitoring also how frequently are teachers calling home. And if I'm the case manager and I'm looking, okay, are the students on my caseload getting phone calls home from their teachers? I noticed that maybe they only got 1 in the past week, but they're not doing so well academically. Part of my job as a case manager would be partnering with teachers, be like, hey, you know how to use Language Line to make sure you're calling home to talk to parents. Language Line provides a translation service so that we can call our parents who are not native English speakers and communicate effectively with them about their students' needs. So a case manager would be monitoring things like that. Are they getting everything in class that they need to be successful? Then pairing that with other intervention services. So level 1 learner, their reading level is probably pretty low. So what are the other reading interventions we need to put in place? Putting the student in guided reading to supplement their English 1 content. Having them in potentially the Algebra Essentials class if their math skills need to be remediated in order to get them up to the Algebra 1 level. So pairing both language learning specific interventions with the overarching content specific interventions that exist in the school. I think also really important to have that case manager perspective. So that could be the director of intervention, that could be someone who's in the intervention department, but someone who is really specifically thinking about the child whole picture and has that responsibility in place. Like, okay, my job is to look at GPA, look at grades, look at family communication, and partner with my teachers to make sure that they're supported and equipped to meet those needs.
So I would like to speak with you, Riley, about your recruiting efforts. What can you tell us about the steps you've taken, the actual steps you've made since the submission of your application to reach out to families in the Jackson area?
In the Jackson area, we have not truthfully done a whole lot of outreach so far. We've met with some folks here who are excited to connect us to families, but we have not yet really engaged in that, unless I'm missing something.
No, I think it's worth saying that, we're planning that we would not open earlier than the 2018-19 school year. And if we think about our process for engaging with communities, at this point in the process being, 2 full years out, we engage with prospective board members and funders and things of that nature, and we've done quite a bit of that. But we wouldn't begin engaging with prospective parents until more like 16 to 12 months out.
So can you talk to us a little bit more, because in you talked about in the early piece of this interview really about need. And, that if there's, it's not a if you build it, they will come type scenario. So what outreach have you done to really know that if you're rooted here, you'll have strong support?
Well, I think those are two different questions, and maybe that's worth talking about itself. And this is something that actually Riley and I have talked a lot about lately. I think that there could be a difference between need and demand, and evidence of need is not the same as evidence that we will have support. So I'll perhaps parse them out. I think when we think about need, we look primarily at the outcomes that are being experienced by our target student population in a city. So we look in Jackson Public Schools, and we look at we've reviewed the performance data of high schools, and we've looked specifically at the achievement gap, and we look at these are the results that we see low-income African American students achieving or not achieving in Jackson Public Schools. And that's how we think about need. We think about need very simply in terms of the population of young people who are attending public high school in a city, and those high schools are not delivering on their implicit and explicit commitments to families, to students, and to communities. High schools, as we believe, high schools make a commitment, whether implicit or explicit, to families and to students to graduate from high school ready for what comes next. And students who drop out, students who fail out, students who graduate with ACT or SAT scores that are not college ready, all of these things, these are students where the commitment hasn't been upheld. And we say that from a place of humility, in that we fail our students also. We would love to say that we succeed with 100% of our students, and that's not the case. But that is to say, I think it's an important thing, and we've had this conversation,
I want to actually, can I just pause you? I want to push you more on the demand.
Yeah, well, your question
Google
seems to be about need.
Can show that there's been some challenges that the organization has faced with this idea around demand and community responsiveness to the organization. So I'd love to hear you talk a little bit more about lessons that you have learned and how that's going to impact your community outreach here.
I think let's take all three: need, demand, and responsiveness. And I think that the demand thing is actually, I think, very interesting and worth just saying. But if we define our terms, so to speak, so we're saying need is about identifying a population of young people who we perceive that they have a need for access to a better open enrollment free public educational option. That's need. Demand we would think about to the extent that given the opportunity but not the obligation to enroll in our school, would they choose of their own volition to send their young people to our school? That's what we think of with demand. Is that fair?
Yeah.
And so I think it's worth noting that we have a weekly leadership team structure. It's called NLT, Network Leadership Team. It was a 2-hour meeting every week. We had it yesterday. And one of our most heated discussions yesterday was, what should we do about the fact that currently 2 of our 3 schools are at meaningful risk of over-enrollment? We were having a discussion about how should we engage with the Recovery School District to get them to allow us to turn away future enrollment, because the school that we just started this year, Livingston Collegiate Academy, currently has 144 students in its 9th grade class, which is that's maybe small compared to
144 show up. They have about 165 committed
enrolled, and that's small compared. I went to a big public high school in Missouri. 144 is very small, but in New Orleans, and given where our other schools have started and where other college sort of charter high schools in New Orleans are, that's a large class, and we're actually very concerned that we are going to end up with 9th grade classes, incoming classes in our schools that are significantly in excess of what we staff for. We hire teachers based on certain assumptions. So I think that I don't dispute your point. I think maybe your implicit point about community responsiveness. I think that it would be great for Riley to speak to that. But I think I do want to really set the facts correctly, that if demand is measured by the extent to which people are choosing to enroll, we actually have the opposite problem presently, and we are concerned that demand, as measured by enrollment, exceeds our supply, which is an interesting conversation internally, because, full disclosure, where there's an active discussion internally, Riley and I have been pushing with our members of the other members of the leadership team around maybe actually running larger high schools and using responding to this excess demand by increasing the size of our high schools. That's obviously that has very significant programmatic implications culturally and otherwise. So we were literally yesterday having a really active conversation about what should we do in response to the fact that we staffed for, hypothetically, we staffed for 160 students. We're worried that we might end up with 180. And depending on your perspective, that's either a great opportunity to staff for a larger high school, or it's a problem because you had a specific programmatic vision that was around having no more than 160 students. So I respect your point, but I think the evidence is, at least today in the year 2016, demand for our schools in New Orleans meaningfully exceeds supply.
Okay. Can you speak to community outreach?
Yeah. So I think the stories that you're referring to were from, or what you saw in a Google search from a few years ago when we had at our school, Carver, and I think it's Academy too, to a way lesser extent, some community backlash around our discipline practices. And to back up a little bit more, when we were cited by the Recovery School District to the Carver building, Carver is an historic, I think until we opened there was 100% African American, and a neighborhood that is bordered by railroad tracks, so it's incredibly difficult to access. It completely flooded after the storm. The school was not to be rebuilt, and a lot of community members who had gone to that school, primarily in the 60s and the early days of the school.
It was founded in 1958 as an all-black high school in New Orleans.
They went to the school district and campaigned to have the school reopened, and had cited there a tremendous building that we just moved into this summer that was like a $60 million facility. It's just incredible space. And we're encouraged at the time by the Recovery School District's superintendent to apply for a charter, which they did. And they were denied, and they applied again, and they were denied, and they applied again, and they were denied. So they were very discouraged when people who are us and who look like us were put in charge of opening a school in their community. I do not think that we handled that situation as well as we should have or could have, and have learned so much from when we moved into that school to where we are now.
So how will that impact sort of what you plan to do here in Jackson?
Tremendous impact. So the lessons learned there were, I think where we, worst case, what we did was dig in and say, we know what's best for your kids, we know what's best for your school, and we're going to do it, and we're just going to plow ahead. And then I think where we shifted over the last 2 years, really, I think we were very bullheaded about that for a long time, to our detriment, the kids' detriment, and the community's detriment, and have moved away from that significantly to now we have, and these are, lessons learned that we would apply here, and we will apply in Baton Rouge too. We have maybe not in the exact same ways, but we have a council of folks who are alums of that school, these 1966, 62 graduates, who serve on a site council, and they provide direction and perspective. They meet with the school leader daily, literally, they are in the office daily, and have shaped the way that we interact with that community, and that I think the way, in fact, that we interact as an entire network has shifted because of this experience. So we do a lot more learning instead of telling. So tell me about your experience. How can we mesh these two things together for the betterment of the children that we're serving, but also for the betterment of the community that we serve? Because it's not just a school is not just a building for children, it's a building for the community, it's a presence for the community. And so our professional development has changed. Yesterday we did a continuing learning on race, class, and equity in New Orleans and in America. Our staff makeup has shifted quite a bit, so you'll see demographically our staff is very different, not just in terms of race, but in terms of age. The school leader at that school has hired alums of that school now in pretty significant numbers. I think probably like upwards of 10% of his staff are alums of that school, and that perspective is just invaluable. Mm-hmm. And then in response to the discipline issue, we in the summer after we got through that year where we had protests and protests, in fact, that were largely led by local activist attorneys, it wasn't like a student organic protest, but neither here nor there. We significantly shifted our discipline practices and dropped our suspension rate by 75%. So we created a restorative practice program in each of our schools that was really meant to interact with behaviors that would have typically earned a student a suspension with a restorative approach. So a student would receive a packet that was, a reflection packet, and they would do that with a counselor in a different setting than a classroom. And then the goal was that they would quickly return to class. And like I said, it resulted in a drop of 75% in suspension, out-of-school suspension rates, and 85% expulsion rates, which coupled with some changes in the way that the district managed expulsion, because it's entirely centralized expulsion process. So they stopped expelling kids for things like having marijuana on them at school. That was no longer an expellable offense. So it helped us keep a lot of students in our doors.
Yeah. So going back to the community, I'm sorry.
I was just going to ask, having had those experiences and the things you've learned from them, what steps have you taken in the Jackson, Mississippi area to make partnerships and connections, significant connections for support for your school?
Again, I would say not a lot, not enough. And what I was going to mention about our experience in Baton Rouge that we are learning from too. I think when we initially engaged in Baton Rouge, we had folks come down. I think like 2 or 3 buses of students, not students, teachers, and community members who were part of an exploratory committee in Baton Rouge that was led by some community folks who wanted better schools for kids, along with New Schools for Baton Rouge, and there's different organizations that were a part of this, and they brought down on 2 to 3 occasions just busloads of folks just to come and see the school. And I think this was 2 or 3 years ago, and at that time we were like, we're going to open a school in your community, it's right around the corner. And then all of those other structural elements that we needed to be there to be able to do that and to be successful kind of fell apart. They've since been put back together, and we are planning to open there next year. So we delayed, yeah. And we had a meeting last year in November where some folks in the community were urging us to go out and tell, like, you're going to open a school in 2016, so like she'd be opening the school next week. And there was no clear path for us to actually do that. And we said, we are not going to go stand, and I am personally not going to go stand in front of parents and children and tell them to come enroll in my school and get excited about this new opportunity and this amazing life that they were going to have because of our school, when we in fact weren't going to be able to open, or I didn't see a very clear pathway for us opening in that year. So I think a lot of our work with the community in terms of getting people to buy into what we were doing just really hit the brakes. And we're trying to re-engage with that, but
I think that there's an order of operations element, which is, I think, really critical. So, like at this outset, we want to identify need, absolutely. But when we've been engaging with, I think what you could call, grass top stakeholders, prospective funders, other schools, in Jackson, to really identify that need and to get a sense of whether we would be supported, whether we could find a facility. We've gone and visited several prospective facilities, most of which are churches, but that's a different conversation. And our thought, though, is that until we actually have an approved charter and a prospective leader on hand, we want to engage with families, with prospective families, and with, I think, a broader swath of more grassroots stakeholders at that point when we are actually prepared to make a real commitment, rather than having it be very sort of hypothetical perspective engagement where we're saying, well, we might be approved for a charter, we might have a prospective leader, we might have a prospective facility. And I think there's definitely space for disagreement about what the right approach is. But I think it's critical. It isn't that we haven't done that engagement because we haven't had the time or occasion, but because we think that we are better off securing the charter, identifying the leader, and getting clarity on the facilities, which then gives between, I would say, probably approximately 18 months to do intensive engagement, which eventually leads directly into staff and student recruitment. Which is to say differently, if we were planning on opening here in fall 2017, we would have already done those things, because that would be crazy. We've done a ton of that in Baton Rouge.
I mean, if anybody has feelings about this, generally speaking, I would love to talk more about it, because it is a debate that I'm having not only like internally among our team, but with folks in Baton Rouge and
we're learning. We're trying.
Yeah.
It's a chicken or egg thing.
Yeah, and I don't want to go stand in front of a mother and tell her, like, get excited about our school and then it not happen for reasons outside of her control or my control. It just doesn't feel authentic, and I don't want to spend her valuable time doing that either.
Yeah. What's your vision for how the board will evolve to accommodate a school in Mississippi?
Yeah, I think that is a great question. I think we're really excited about the prospect of board members from Mississippi, absolutely, because we think on the one hand, we don't want to operate in any place without local champions and people who can keep us connected more closely to the community. And we also see it as a great opportunity to get more wisdom and expertise from people with diverse backgrounds on our board. So it's a little bit of a question how exactly we would do it. I think that at a minimum, I think most likely what we would end up doing is having a sort of like macro, sort of like a national board that incorporates people from Mississippi and Louisiana. We've done some soft engagement with people. We had a meeting. We were here a couple months ago, and we met with, as an example, like Mr. Barksdale, Jim Barksdale, and he's an example of someone whom we would certainly entreat him to join our board, and he might tell us no, but we had at least a good, in-person meeting, and I think we would. Secondarily, most likely we would have a traditional Mississippi board also that would be comprised of people from the Jackson community, and I think in an ideal scenario, what we have is a high level of overlap between the two. So hypothetically speaking, there might be 2 or 3 persons whom we invite to essentially be on both the kind of the local board and the national board. And then there would be other people who are simply on the local board. I think that the model that Reimagine Republic Public Schools has taken is approximately what we want to do. And I know, for example, we've talked extensively with Mr. Speed and Leland and Stuart Hood. And Stuart, for example, I think he transitioned actually from being on their local board to being on their national board. And we would ideally have people who do both. But it's an asset from our perspective. Having board meetings, all of that, there's a minor amount of paperwork and bureaucracy associated with it, but it's absolutely it's a huge asset, and it's a huge opportunity to get investment, input, buy-in, and support from people prospectively. And if we this is sort of the order of operations with charter, leader, engage deeply, we would try to cultivate a diverse and large number of people to play roles on either board. And in an ideal scenario, we have more people than we can possibly manage.
So I just want to play back to what I'm hearing. So right now you have a Collegiate Academies Board, which
Louisiana
governs
board.
the organization, including its schools.
Yes.
Whereas you might move to a model where it's a Collegiate Academies Board, and then there are boards for each school or potentially each city that,
What we would do, I think in this scenario, what we would do is right now we have a Louisiana board, but we don't have any schools outside of Louisiana. So the Louisiana board is, the national board also.
Yeah.
I think we would most likely have a Louisiana board. It's a corporate entity, all of that. A Mississippi board, absolutely. And also a national board that perhaps we've talked about is called actually a council. So as to avoid confusion, is it actually called a council? Does it have the term advisory in it? We need to figure out what makes the most sense. But we would have a sort of national council that would have meaningful overlap in representation with individuals who are on the local Louisiana and the local Mississippi board, but also have some people who are just on it. So for example, Senator Landrieu from Louisiana, she is not on our Louisiana board, but she has agreed to serve on our national council. Walter Isaacson is not on our Louisiana board. He's the second identified person for our sort of national, whatever we decide to call it. And we would seek to have people from Mississippi, obviously on a Mississippi board, and also on the national council.
so who would be the charter holder of the Mississippi school?
I think in the our preference would be, well, it's an interesting question, and it's kind of an ongoing discussion with our lawyer, and I think we would probably also consult with our authorizer here on what's the cleanest. From we look at it really from a Louisiana perspective, where it feels important politically and legally to have clearly in Louisiana, like a Louisiana nonprofit corporation that has an official board with the Louisiana Secretary of State, and that holds the charter. And we would be happy to do it that way in Mississippi, and we would be happy to do it otherwise. I think I come at this, as an authorizer and otherwise with different perspectives, and I think that I've been a part of many conversations with organizations like Rocket Ship, or where there's a lot of dispute and discussion about what exactly should the board structure be. We want to have a board structure that authentically respects and empowers a local community. We are not looking to have a board structure that makes some sort of Mississippi board an afterthought or a subsidiary of our Louisiana board. We're not looking to do any, and I know I've seen all sorts of complicated machinations where people try to have a way that there's technically a local board, but actually it's just a paper tiger or a creature of the other board. We have no desire to do that. In our, we would want people in Mississippi to view our schools here correctly as a legitimate Mississippi thing.
Yeah.
And have a board that they feel like they have recourse to as well. I think a question of how we would schedule meetings, we've thought about that, and there's a lot of innovation. Maybe innovation's not exactly the right term, but there's a lot of creativity in how people do this. So I could imagine, I could imagine that we might, for example, perhaps we wouldn't have a board, maybe we wouldn't have 12 board meetings a year in each state. Maybe we would have, 10 in each state, and we would have 2 that kind of alternate.
I'm primarily thinking actually less about the logistics and meetings, communications, more about the capacity of the group who's going to oversee the school. And so, there are a number of people listed right now that are in Louisiana. So would they actually be governing this school, or maybe not, because there would be subsequently a board formed?
Yeah.
That's just what I'm...
I think it's a good question, and I think that I think we would want to consult our authorizer on what exactly, given the sort of the political climate, where having had some SPLC engagement in our past in New Orleans, we are a little bit curious and wary, I suppose, of what the political environment might look like right now. In our, we have several board members who are extremely strong, with whom we have very, very, very strong relationships and rely on them very extensively, who would absolutely be on the National Advisory Council. Absolutely. I think, Stephen Rosenthal, Jonathan Williams, Wilson, Gregory, and others. And we would want to figure out the best legal and political structure that would maintain their governance while adding to it authentically and in a politically acceptable way the voice and support of local people.
Yep. Thank you.
I appreciate the clarification there, Beth. I wasn't sure where you were going.
Tell us more about your plans for recruiting a school leader for this particular school? If chartered, are you looking internally? Would you?
Yeah, we have a really intensive fellowship process. I actually need to send Soraya, our human capital person, an email right after this because she's about to start, basically put out the message to the network about recruitment for fall 2018. So we've had, our process is basically a 2 full year. So people would be, the 2016-17 year beginning imminently, other than the 2017-18 year, they would be doing a 2-year intensive fellowship as they prepared for a launch. We are not opposed to a wonderful external candidate. We actually really love the idea of getting someone from Jackson who would commit to come and work for us for 2 years as part of the fellowship, but we have really serious expectations about what this person would do and how they would systematically demonstrate mastery as a teacher, as a middle leader. And we found that often great people from outside don't want to come and do a 2-year fellowship where they're going to have to demonstrate mastery as a teacher because perhaps they're already an assistant principal somewhere else. But we have a really meaningful, in terms of numbers, we have a really significant bench of middle leaders who have been cultivated for many years, and I expect that we will have a number of individuals seek to enter the fellowship that is, 10 or more, and I imagine that we will end up with at least 2 or 3 individuals who meet all of the expectations for the fellowship. So we're on track right now to have internal school leaders and to have essentially every year we aim to have 2 or 3 people who could be ready to launch schools, whereas our growth plan is only 1 school a year.
Gotcha. And are those fellowships paid?
Yes, yeah, they work. I mean, Kelsey, maybe you can talk about yours, but they do real work. It's not fun.
Yeah, you don't really
tell her how it's not fun.
You're fulfilling your position. So this is actually my 3rd year in the fellowship because my school got delayed a year. But so my first year in the fellowship, I was the director of intervention at Sci Academy. So I was continuing to do my current role with additional fellowship exploration and readings and meetings and book clubs and evaluations, stuff like that on top of it. And then in the 2nd year, at that point, I had committed to Baton Rouge. And so my 2nd year was a more intensive, okay, what are the critical skills for you to be developing this year as you get ready to launch? And so my role became much more of a hybrid role. So I was an assistant principal at one of our schools. I was also a culture dean for 9th grade, and I was teaching English 1 at the same time. So we kind of put some roles together so that I would get more at-bats and quick hits on the things most important for me to develop in. But so now I'm in my 3rd year. I'm getting my lanyap year this year. And so all the while, I'm fulfilling a position with Collegiate Academy, so that's how I'm getting paid. The fellowship is not a separate position. Does that make sense?
Can you explain to me a little bit more about how the school structure is organized? So the application read that all teachers report up to the school leader. So what is the role then of the coaches? That could be a lot of people to manage. So what does that actually look like for a school leader?
Yeah, so schools have autonomy to structure their leadership as they choose. But the very general structure, I feel like all of our schools have used a very similar model. You have your school leader and then a director of curriculum and instruction. And typically, school leader is driving culture while the DCI is driving academics, with a whole lot of overlap between the 2 roles. And then you have your director of intervention, your director of finance and operations, and then usually an additional operational position that the director of finance and ops is supporting and leading. Then most schools have used a culture dean model where there's a culture dean for each grade level. But I guess all of our schools now also have a dean of students position. So someone who is working in the restorative center and overseeing our restorative approaches and how those overlap with classroom practice.
So if I'm a teacher, who's giving me feedback, who's
Yep.
reviewing my lesson
Yeah.
plans, who's observing me in classrooms?
Great question. And that part has been different across our schools, but typically the director of curriculum and instruction has defined a system of some sort. In Livingston, this year is its first year, so the DCI is going to be the primary coach for all teachers, and she and I are actually going to coach everyone. So there are about 8 teachers, we'll each coach 4, and we'll review lesson plans, we'll observe classrooms, and we'll do the coaching cycle. At the other
Does that look
schools,
like in a full
yeah.
size school?
So it's been traditionally split up between the director of intervention, so that person's bringing expertise into special programs and intervention services, and then content leads, department heads, so an English lead, a math lead, a science lead for each content, and then they're holding weekly department meetings, building their expertise, and then observing teachers, giving feedback. SCI is switching their model pretty extensively, or they're bigger now, and so their staffing model is changing a bit to the point that their culture deans are teaching about 2 periods a day, and then the culture deans are going to be doing a ton of observation and feedback and coaching. So different schools have used different models, including department head or culture dean being kind of the primary drivers of that, but also at different times our schools have used an overlap of those two to do that. So it's not as clean cut that each school has used a similar model, but usually the DCI defines it in some way, and the DCI is typically the one driving it from the academic perspective.
We also started a program called, I'm sorry, did you have a question?
Yeah, go ahead.
We're down to the
Yeah.
last very few minutes.
Yes,
Oh,
go ahead.
okay.
We're going to move to the.
Sure.
I'll let you go with your question about facilities because I want to use the last few minutes to ask about the budget questions. Okay. So if you want to.
I think you maybe have already much answered my question because we were wondering about a facility search.
Yeah, I think we physically visited 3 different prospective facilities, and I talked to Stuart Hood 2 days ago, maybe yesterday, and we were going to see another one today, but I think we're going to be back in 2 weeks and see it then. He thinks he's found an even better option. Honestly, we really want to spend as much money as possible on our staff and our intervention, so we think about facilities primarily from we need a basic number of classrooms. We want to be in a location that works and will attract our the sort of students we want to serve, which are to say those most in need of a better high school option. And the schools were in trailers for a long time in modulars. So our perspective on facilities is not about it being, fancy or beautiful or anything else. We want to make sure we can afford it, and we want it to be in a reasonable location. We've seen a couple of places to probably meet our needs, and we believe that we can structure a partnership with the Hood Family Foundation to make the kind of facility we want affordable for us on a per pupil basis, sort of the approach that they've taken with Republic. And we'll probably see another one in 2 weeks. It's worth noting that the experience of in New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina, with schools being in modular trailers and with schools moving around so often and having to be in swing space, it's just like a totally different world.
Yeah.
Like the notion, in New Orleans, when I was at the Cranberry School District, we probably had 6 to 8 schools moving buildings every year. I know that probably sounds crazy, but in our context, it feels normal. And so our perspective on facilities is about it being good enough so that we can make our academic model work. And we've demonstrated that we can make our academic model work in some pretty crazy circumstances. So we really think about it on day 1 of school, when we have a 9th grade class between, let's say, 125 and 150 scholars, are they in a safe space that we've made beautiful and conducive to their learning? And if you were to say you're going to be in this here for 1 year, and then you're going to move here for 2 years, and then there for another year, we would say oh, of course, that's the norm. which I know it sounds crazy, but it's like a post-Katrina New Orleans phenomenon.
I'm sorry to cut you off.
No,
we need
please.
to get maybe a couple of questions in
Sure,
within
yeah.
a couple of minutes.
Yeah.
So we're going to shoot for as being as thorough as we can, but also being concise.
Right.
So quick question. The first one is in your proposal, in the cover sheet, you mentioned a target of 120 students, but in the narrative and budget, you mentioned 150. And of course, this difference impacts your budget, revenues, and expenses. So we would like to know, what is your target enrollment? Is it the 120 or the 150?
It's 150. That must have been something that we failed to revise appropriately. I apologize.
The second question I'd like to ask is that your budget calls for an expense of $854.08 per pupil for a management company fee, but we don't see this covered in the narrative. So we'd like to know, how did you arrive at this amount? Who is it paid to, and what services are being provided?
Yep, and so that it might be a semantic thing. That's just the CMO fee. It's a replication of currently in New Orleans, the schools receive support from our nonprofit central office. There's no for-profit company or anything, but our chief academic officer, our positions and others are not school-based positions, and the schools pay between like 8 and 12% of their per pupil revenue to reimburse the cost of the central office. The cost of the central office is actually really significantly in excess of that, as is often the case. And we centrally raise money primarily from national foundations and also the federal government to provide the additional support. That amount of money, there's an element of fluidity here, because many positions, as in the case of the coaching, the positions could be school-based positions or they could be central positions. And it's kind of a question of how do you want to frame it.
Okay. Last quick question. In your budget, you have budgeted $1.2 million in private funding.
Yeah.
Given your current level or lack of community connections and partnerships at this point in time, what is your confidence that you will be able to raise that amount of private funding?
I think extremely confident. I think that in Baton Rouge, we've raised more money, significantly more money actually, but from a couple of local funders and the Charter School Growth Fund. We've talked to the Charter School Growth Fund about our prospective expansion to Mississippi, and although they would rather we stay in Louisiana because they're more focused on Louisiana, they're willing to fund us into Mississippi. And also based on our conversations with Mr. Speed, with Leland Speed, and with Stuart Hood, I believe that we can put together a financial package in that area. We've talked specifically about the way that often people look at this is an amount of money per seat, and we've talked specifically about terms.
Cool. Great. Any last questions? Good? Good. Okay. Want to give you a few minutes. If there was anything that you expected to come up during the interview that you didn't get to talk about, or if there's any last concluding remarks you want to make in the last 2 minutes, the floor is yours.
I think I expected more questions about our special education programming and how we think about being our own local education agency, but I think that Kelsey already handled some of those kind of indirectly. I would say that serving a population of students with really significant needs is something that is core to our model. And it is, if you look nationally at charter schools, like generally speaking, charter schools that are college preparatory in their aspirations tend to serve a population of students with IEPs that is meaningfully below the average of the district. And our practice is the exact opposite. Like, we systematically seek to serve a diverse population of students, including those with really significant and low incidence needs. We have really innovative programming toward that end in our schools in New Orleans, and we are hugely committed to continuing that practice. If we were to come to Jackson, we don't think of ourselves as college preparatory in the sense that we would be seeking to bring into our school ninth graders who have all done well in eighth grade, or who are normally abled or don't have sort of disadvantages. It's actually the opposite. A lot of what inspires us about our work is proving what's possible with good interventions and high expectations, and we would seek to replicate that practice by serving the absolute neediest young people in Jackson.
All Awesome. All right. Well, thank you very much for your time this morning.
Can I say one other thing? Just the last thing that I would say is that we are, we were a little bit caught off guard by the SPLC lawsuit. We don't understand. I think that probably nobody really knows how things are going to go. We certainly don't. We don't understand all of the implications. And I think that I would just say, it's very possible that there could be, especially thinking about the budget, there could be material elements of what we propose that would actually need to change depending on how all of that plays out. And I think it probably goes without saying, but as you know, it's not like we had an opportunity to revise anything. It's a good thing on the board, for example. I find myself thinking about the difference between there's a board structure that's legal. Is that board structure politically feasible? I don't know. We're thinking a lot more deeply about the political feasibility than we were before that lawsuit. And it could be that we're blowing it out of proportion. It's not going to be a big deal. But that's just worth saying.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, thank you very much for your time. I have most recently been sitting on that side of the table, so I understand and can appreciate that this is a arduous process, the chartering process, and want to thank you for the time and effort that you have put into it. So what is going to happen for next steps is this team here will convene and make a recommendation to the board on a chartering decision. That report will then be delivered to you all on August 19th, so you will know the decision at that point. And then the board will actually vote on September 12th. Okay. In the meantime, if you have questions or any questions can be directed to Marian, who will continue to be the primary point person for applicants in this process.
And after you receive that recommendation, you'll have a week to provide a written response. So the applicants can have the last word in the process.
Is a response obligatory, or just we feel we've been misrepresented?
It's not obligatory.
Okay, great.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's nice to meet you.
We have 90 minutes. We will introduce ourselves in a moment, but this team in front of you read your application in its entirety, and from that, and then met to debrief the application, and from that have generated some questions that we will use to guide our time together this afternoon. We'll start with introducing ourselves, and then we will ask you all to very briefly introduce yourselves as well.
Good morning, everybody. Beth Sealing. I'm from outside of Chicago today. Formerly of New Orleans. I work right now as an independent consultant on a lot of charter authorizing related matters. I was previously an authorizer myself in Chicago Public Schools, and before that, actually started on that side of the table, working with the KIPP network, opening schools around the country. So glad to be here today.
Hi, my name is Rebecca Cass. Most recently, I was with the Excel Academy Charter School Network in Boston, Massachusetts as their managing director of academics. Previously to that, I worked for the National Association of Charter School Authorizers, as well as in the Charter Schools Office of the Massachusetts Department of Education.
Good morning, I'm Tommy Henderson. Currently, I'm a professor at Mississippi College in the Department of Educational Leadership and the coordinator of the doctoral program with the emphasis in curriculum instruction. I have 37 years of experience in the public schools as a teacher and as an administrator, and I retired as superintendent of Clinton Public Schools, which is the highest performing district in Mississippi.
Good morning. My name is Kimberly Dorsey. I am a professor of business at Mississippi University for Women. I've been teaching strategic management and operations management now for about 13, 14 years. My personal connection with the public school district comes from my upbringing. My father was a school superintendent in the Mississippi School District for 20 years. The entire time that I was in school, he was my school superintendent. So I've watched and seen a lot of that process up close and personal. And I do have children in the Mississippi Public School District, so I have a great interest in this process.
Great. And Marion and Aaron in the back.
Hi, I'm Marian Shetty. I'm the Executive Director of the Mississippi Charter School Authorizer Board.
Hi everyone, I'm Erin Reddy. I work for the National Association of Charter School Authorizers based out of Chicago.
And then I'd like for each of you to go around and very briefly tell us your name. If this is not your day job of being a charter school interviewee, what you do for a day job and what your role will be if the school is chartered.
Hey, good morning. My name's Dave Massa. I'm the CFO for ICANN Schools, treasurer for Mississippi Prep. I'm a CPA by trade, and I have my own consulting business, so I support 60 charter schools in the state of Ohio.
I'm Sam Peters. I'm from Jackson. I'm in real estate development on the commercial side. Are you in the leadership program with the master's program?
Master's.
Yeah, one of my good friends Nick Henderson was maybe 2 years ago graduated from that. He's over at Jackson Academy, and
Yes.
he loved that program.
Good.
Speaks very highly of it. But anyway, I'm a part of the board here with Mississippi Prep, and we are just excited to be here.
My name is Yvonne Atkins. I work as the Executive Director of Governmental Relations and Strategic Partnerships for ICANN Schools.
My name is Marshall Emerson III. I'm the co-founder and CEO of ICANN Schools.
Good morning. I'm Anthony Dean. I own a public relations and marketing firm here in the Jackson area. Formerly, I'm communications director for Jackson State University. I spent a great deal of my career in public broadcasting, marketing, and public relations. So I'm a board member and excited to bring my experience and expertise to the board.
Morning, Jason Stragan. This is my daytime job. Serve as the co-founder and chief academic officer for ICANN Schools.
Good morning, I'm Janice Weaver. I'm a board member. I've been an educator for more than 10 years. My daughter just graduated from Mississippi College. She leaves tomorrow for law school. I wish you hadn't educated her so well. She wouldn't have gotten accepted. I have former students that are studying theater at the W, just having a phenomenal experience. Love the professors up there. Work very closely with secondary schools to get my high school students off there. So I'm Janice.
Good morning. Save the best for last. My name is Monifa Bill Horton. I am by trade a family nurse practitioner here in the Jackson area at the G.B. Stoney Montgomery Medical Center. I am a product of public school upbringing. My children my child right now is in Clinton Public Schools, and I'm a board member, and I'm just excited to be here.
Excellent. Great. So we're going to use the next 60 minutes or so to go through some questions that we have developed from your application. I apologize if we cut you off, but it's because we want to keep on moving along. So without further ado, I will get started and would love to ask the group, why Mississippi? So ICANN has built a strong presence in other areas of the country, and why Mississippi, and why Mississippi right now?
Well, I could start, and then feel free to jump in.
Before you start, I'm going to be taking copious notes. I'm a designated note taker, so it's kind of a distraction. I apologize in advance.
That's okay. So we've been, watching the development in Mississippi here. A few of us were involved with charter schools from the beginning in Ohio back in '98, and that's an exciting time. To be involved in something as it's starting. So we've watched the charter school law be developed here, and really just wanted to be a part of that. I have an aunt that is a teacher in Mississippi, and Marshall has family here. So we've been watching, and with the connections we made, just really wanted to have an impact right from the start. So you guys feel free to add on.
No, I think, like what Don said, we are just really excited to be here. We think after speaking with Marion almost 2 years ago, we began to study the need here in Jackson, Mississippi, and we feel that there's an opportunity to provide families with a quality choice for education, and that's what we're bringing. I think we stand for high-performing schools and high-performing academics, and we want to work in collaboration with the Jackson City to do this. So I think there's a lot of need and a lot of work to be done here, and we've made our job to go where the need is. We were asked by the city of Indianapolis, the mayor's office there, and they said, hey, you guys have got a great model, please bring it here, because we have a great need on the east side of Indianapolis, and we did just that. And we don't haphazardly just grow. And so I think that we've been looking at what's going on here in Jackson for a while now. And we believe that our model can work really, really well with some of the families here. So we're really excited.
We pay attention to the innovation, and I can respect the innovation that this team has put forth in just the application itself. We've seen a lot of different applications, and a lot of the same questions are asked. And I think with this application, there were some really interesting questions that have never been asked of us. And I appreciated answering those questions. Like, talk to us about your highest performing school that's in your portfolio and tell us why it's high performing. And then you ask the counterpart to that. Well, tell us about, a school that struggles in your portfolio and talk to us why it's struggling and what you do to fix it. And I think that, you strategically, place that question in there, and that led us to believe that you guys really care about who you bring in and who you allow to stand in front of your kids, and we're hypersensitive about that. So I think right off the bat, there was a level of innovation there and mark of high standards that we want to be a part of.
And let me speak a little bit from the board side of things. I know myself, and I've gotten to know the rest of the board members. We're kind of all independent of each other, have gotten to know each other just through kind of the common theme of this, more so of just providing a choice for children to be educated. Mississippi, for those of you that are from here and have always been from here, is kind of a unique place in that you have people with good wealth, and then you have people in extreme poverty and everywhere in between. And so there's a vast divide between you're either forced to go to the public school because you cannot afford any other choice, because the private school is just not affordable, and they're getting less and less affordable every day. And so you see situations where, and especially in a city like Jackson, where you almost feel like some kids are, the choice is being taken away from them because their families, something that they can't control at all, are being forced into a situation where this is their only option. And so me personally, I got really excited when I saw the charter laws being put into place, that there was going to be a choice for these kids that could bridge the gap, where you're not bound by a specific set of rules of how you have to educate children, and it just becomes about preparing these kids for not only school but for life. And then meeting with the ICANN people on my side of things was really exciting to hear their story and how they've kind of come together and have an incredible track record of sending kids to the next level and preparing them for, again, not only some kids may be college, some kids it may just be life. And so that's kind of where I come from on the board side of things.
How is ICANN? Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay, I was just going to chime in and sort of echo what he has said, because it's the common ground for, I think, all of us here is the quality of education that ICANN School and Mississippi Prep can provide our students. I've been around Jackson for quite some time. I left and came back. And what I found out, a number of my friends are leaving the city of Jackson only because of they believe that their children can get a better education in the surrounding cities. Now, I've worked in city government here in Jackson as well, and I know that the need is there. in ICANN schools, Mississippi Prep can provide the services that our students so desperately need in the Jackson metropolitan area. So that's what attracted me after reading and studying the curriculum. Then it is clear to me what they can provide, what we can provide, and that our students can be better prepared for the next level of education and to become productive citizens in the future and really give back to this community. Hopefully they won't leave, but move back and be productive citizens in this area.
Yeah. So for ICANN, this would be the first large geographical jump, that where you have expanded into other states, it's been a little bit more concentrated than what a move to Jackson would be for the organization. So how is ICANN thinking about that in terms of the adaptations that the team would have to make to be able to support schools here?
Well, in terms of time alone, when we expanded to Indianapolis, flying there, and I'm going to get to the answer of your question, but at the end of the day, it takes us about 5 hours to get there, whether you're driving or flying. Flying here from Cleveland, it's about 4.5 to 5 hours because there's not a direct flight. So in terms of time, we're looking at the same. And we were still able to provide platinum level service to our school in the city of Indianapolis. Right now, we have a gentleman, and his name is listed in the application, Donald Gordon. He's from the south side of Chicago. He moved his family to Cleveland, Ohio, and has been studying the ICANN school model since February of this year. So he still has 6 months left in his fellowship, and he's studying underneath one of our most successful principals that we have at ICANN schools. So we put together a pretty unique and individualized a program that took his skill set and will sophisticate his level of knowledge as it relates to becoming a founding leader of a brand new school in a brand new city. And so by the time his fellowship is up, he would have spent an entire year studying ICANN schools, traveling the countries, spending time at high-performing schools in New York, in Boston, in D.C., in Chicago, also working and has been accepted into a program in Boston called Building Excellent Schools. He applied, was accepted into the program. And so we have a really good partnership with that organization out of Boston. So by the time he's finished, he's going to be ready to be the founding principal at Mississippi Preparatory School. So after his year fellowship, he will come down to Mississippi and begin to call this place home. And with him, he will have 2 to 3 deans, depending upon the need that we find down here. So we'll have a dean of instruction and learning, and we'll have 2 to 3 deans of student life and management, and we'll also have an office manager. So there will be a team of 5 to 6 people who will call Mississippi home beginning in February of 2017. So they will be finding and attracting teachers. They will be building relationships within the community. By that time, we'll already have found a location. So it will be about getting to know the community and really teaching the families about the mission and the vision of Mississippi Prep. And in addition to having the team on the ground, we have, of course, all of the back office support that is located in Ohio. So student admissions, talent recruitment,
Are you currently doing that for your Indiana school out of Cleveland?
We are. Yeah, so if I can add what Jason said, we have, so on the academic side, we do have our principals hired inside of our fellowship program. They're training. They'll be finished up this year. In January, we'll have our deans, our student life and management, like our instructional leaders. We'll deploy those individuals and have them on the ground in Mississippi. Between now and then, our home office in Ohio will spend we'll make trips back and forth inside of into Jackson and out of Jackson. Similarly, we've done this in Indianapolis. So we'll spend the next 6 months cultivating relationships here in Jackson by flying in, meeting with individuals, looking for a location. We've identified a couple, and we can talk about that later, doing a little bit of raising money and things like that and trying to get the program off the ground. So our home office is more than equipped to support the expansion of one school here in Jackson, Mississippi.
So they helped you with student recruitment. They did.
So yeah, we do student recruitment. So each department that we have they'll create a strategic plan for Jackson. Once the stars align and the moons align, we'll create a strategic plan for recruitment. It looks more like we're running for office down here. We get out, we shake hands, we walk the streets, we canvass a lot. We show up at pretty much any nonprofit and we say, here, we want to tell our story, and this is why we need to be in Jackson. We'll also bring on a couple of street teams to help us get the word out, partner with some nonprofits to get in front of congregations and speak in front of churches and things like that. And that will be assisted by our student recruitment person in Ohio, but we'll put a person on the ground here to facilitate and be that point person. Teacher recruitment is the same way. We'll put together a strategic plan for hiring teachers. We know the model that we operate, so we'll work backwards from the first day of training and figure out how many teachers we need to have in place. And Jason and the academic team, they've done a great job of scouring the country and trying to find people. Cleveland, as Jason would say, is not the most attractive place to work and live. And so we have to attract people to come to Northeast Ohio to want to work and live and teach in Canton, Ohio, or Akron in Ohio. And so we have created a great job description to attract people to come and work for ICANN schools. Pretty much your zealots, really mission-driven, passionate people. And we feel that strategic plan will work really, really well for the state of Mississippi and Jackson. We also have our CFO, the treasurer for the board, will be working very closely with us to make sure that we don't overspend, right? and that we stay within budget and we were able to accomplish our goals. So overall, the management team, we're more than capable of opening one school.
I think one of the things that we do very well is make our schools feel supported. Talking about the geographical differences, last thing we want them to feel is like they're out on an island. And I think we've shown this year with Indy that, we can accomplish that. We're just not some, group in Ohio that, they never see in the schools down here on their own. Yvonne and I lived that for many years, working for other organizations, and we had schools across the country, and we know what the detriments of those are. So,
So can you guys give us some specific examples of how you adapt to bring the regional or the central office, if you will, to your schools, specifically in Indianapolis and Jackson? So for instance, your summer academy, sounds like a really important piece of your culture and your infrastructure. How does that do you send folks to Ohio for that, or do you come to
A little bit of both. So Jason, we start on the academic side now, talk a little bit about the operations and what that looks like.
It's morphed over the years. So, right now we have around 270 teachers. And if you could imagine, 270 teachers being in one location, and they're kind of farmed out to a bunch of different rooms, and they rotate almost like a schedule that a student would go throughout the day. And we found that worked, but as we grew, we felt as though that there was some level of intimacy that was lost. So when we opened up in Indiana College Preparatory School, of course, the distance caused us to think a little bit differently. So we had the principal and her team of leaders train her own set of teachers based off of modules that we created centrally in Ohio using some of our best leaders and teachers. So the principal wasn't one, reinventing the wheel, and or two, spending the time to create these modules instead of being out in the community where he or she really, really needs to be spending her time. And we found that the proficiency level of the teachers were increased significantly just by increasing the intimacy of the professional development. And so based on that, we said, you know what, we need to do that in Ohio. So rather than having 270 teachers show up to one large gymnasium and we farm them out to different classrooms, we created the modules centrally using our teachers and our leaders as lesson plan writers and designers. We pushed them down to our principals and said, you study these modules and we want to watch you teach them to us and give you feedback. So we had to make sure that our principals knew the information code. And so this past week actually was the turnaround training, and we received wonderful feedback on the level of intimacy that they were able to build and have with their own set of teachers, training and developing them. So we would do the same thing, create and develop these modules centrally in Ohio based on best practices, trends, and patterns that we've observed over the years, push them down to the principals, say, study, we want to watch you teach this, give you feedback, and then it would be up to Donald Gordon and his team to professionally develop and train the Mississippi Prep teachers. And of course, we would be here on the ground offering support to Donald each and every day. So I think that there will be specific times when we have to take a much more hands-on approach, and other times where a weekly phone call, just touching base with the standing agenda, will keep us abreast of everything that's happening.
Okay. All right, so that's really helpful. And then continuing on along the academic program, so let's see what order to ask these in. So first of all, just a kind of specific question. It seems like there's a lot of data being collected across your network and in your schools. What is the organization's plan for collecting all of that and analyzing that? We just weren't clear on kind of what system you use to track all of the student data.
You mean student data as it relates to attendance or assessment?
Performance.
Performance.
Yeah.
Okay, so you want to speak to that, Jason?
Sure. So depending upon what assessment we give would depend on the mode in which we house the data. Mm-hmm. So some of our online assessments, for instance, our ANET testing, our iReady testing is done online. And so I know that you guys get this because you're in education. They take the test, it is graded for us, the data is sent back down to us, mm-hmm. and at the click of a few buttons, we're able to manipulate the data to see individual student performance, grade band performance, or classroom-wide performance. Mm-hmm. And in other of our assessments, it's kind of the old school paper and pencil, the teacher grading the assessments and paying attention to what questions are assessing what skills. And we use that data to then manipulate and inform our lesson plans. So in terms of what data gets kicked up to us, mm-hmm. This first school year at Mississippi Prep, we're going to have a focus on reading and writing. And we feel as though if we can't teach our kids how to write and close the gap as it relates to reading, everything else is going to be a struggle for our kids, from math to social studies to science. So if we can teach our kids how to read and do that really, really well, things will more organically fall into place. So kindergarten through second grade, we're really paying attention to phonemic awareness and decoding, listening, comprehension. First and second grade, we're really paying attention to oral reading fluency and reading comprehension. And at grades 3 through 8, we're able to kind of tackle the big 5 in reading, the phonemic awareness, the decoding, the oral reading fluency, the vocabulary development, and reading comprehension. So we're really going to be paying attention to that. And that's the data that's being pushed up to us, mm-hmm. so that we can draw comparisons to the number of words kids are reading per minute, to actually how much they're understanding when they read independently. But then we also draw comparisons to their GPA, as silly as that may sound. So if you have a class that's 50% proficient or higher in reading, but their GPAs on their report cards are showing that 85% of the kids are scoring at 3.5 or higher, there is a huge disconnect there. So we really do pay attention to the data, and some of it is housed in-house, and others is just Paper and pencil.
That's helpful. I was actually trying to get to what are you monitoring as a network? And then, so the next question is, how are you tracking, or what are you tracking as the bar to know whether your schools are and its students are performing at the level where you're satisfied as a network?
So
we give a beginning of the year diagnostic assessment in reading and mathematics, and we will always start where our kids are at. And by using that beginning of the year diagnostic benchmark, we'll set an end of the year goal. And if that goal is 75, or if it's 80%, let's just talk reading. Okay, we want 80% of our kids to perform proficient or higher as it relates to assessment A or assessment B. We'll set 4 to 5 trajectory benchmarks in which we will ask for data, and we will be able to have open and honest conversations with our board, with our leadership teams, with the individual teachers as to whether or not they're on track to meet their trajectory. Benchmark goal number 1 is to have 30% of your kids reading at proficient or higher, because at the end of the year, we're asking you to meet 80%. And this first benchmark, only 15% of your kids are reading proficient or higher. You know that you're not on a trajectory to meet that end of the year goal. So it's more than just kind of, saying a prayer in the corner of the classroom and hoping that your kids are going to end up reading at the school year. I don't think board members, I don't think principals or teachers or even parents feel safe having those kinds of conversations. But when you can tie it back to a specific number, if you're on the trajectory to meet the benchmark. And I always share with the board, it should never be a surprise how we perform on the map, for instance. It shouldn't be a surprise for you. I should be able to tell you it's Q1, and if we were to take the map today, this is where we would perform.
So we've been doing that over the past, I don't know how many years together. So in Indianapolis, we assess every 6 weeks. In Ohio, we assess every 6 weeks. So there's data being kicked up to us. Like Jason said, in some cases it's ANET. In other cases, we're back to paper and pencil. In Ohio, we switched assessments over the last 2 years because of the core. Indianapolis, you have the ISTEP. And so we'll map backwards. We'll use, for example, practice assessments and those sorts of things for our paper and pencil. We'll put together an assessment system and map it backwards from the end of the year to give us some trajectory goals. ANET is a computer-based system that's tied to the core and helps us in Ohio. Provides the same sort of assessment numbers for us.
And then one more question related to academics. We saw your list of kind of curricular resources and materials that teachers can draw from. What is in the shoes of a teacher? What is their process for determining, assuming that they're using some of this data, how do they go about determining what's the best? So for instance, you might have 3 math programs that you listed. Which one do they pick and why?
So we put together 3 years ago lesson design teams. And so we took, and this is the beauty of having several schools with several teachers in a grade band. And we have increased efforts on collaboration. So collectively, throughout ICANN schools, we have about 20 kindergarten teachers. We have 20 first grade teachers. We have 20 second grade teachers, so on and so forth. And so we can select our best lesson planners out of each one of those grade bands. And we say, here's what we need you to do. Take the scope and sequence as it aligns to X state's standards. And make sure our scope and sequence makes sense. We're teaching the right things at the right times. But then, based on these standards, we need you to create the most sophisticated lesson plan so that we can give to our teachers a lesson plan that's already been created by a master level team of teachers. And so that way, by default, we know that at any given time when we walk into a classroom, we know that there is hot stuff on paper that's being placed in front of our kids. It's left up to the principal and his or her team to make sure that this hot stuff is translating into hot instruction. And if it's not, the principal and his team needs to go in and coach to increase the service that we're providing in terms of instruction for our kids. Now, what we don't want to do is to tell our teachers, you need to teach this and you need to teach it this way, and whatever it says on page 2, paragraph 3, you need to stick to it. And you're giggling because you're a teacher, and I was too. I taught second grade, and I didn't like feeling so constricted that I have to teach this because someone told me how to teach it and they gave it to me. So we tell teachers that this is the bottom, this is the base, this is what we need you to cover. If you'd like to delete, add to, or sprinkle your personality on top of to make sure it feels like it's you when it's being taught, we want to give you the autonomy to use your professional teaching voice to make that happen. But at minimum, what we've tried to do is eliminate the guesswork for our teachers. I was a first-year teacher, and I can remember going to the staff bathroom and crying on my first day to my mother, like, oh my God, I just spent 4 years in, college for teaching, and I don't want to be a teacher anymore. I can't do this. She said, son, don't worry, it's going to get better. And so I know what it feels like. And we have a lot of first-year teachers who have the right intention and their heart is in the right place. But when you give them a scope and sequence and you give them a lesson plan template and we say, follow this and try your best to offer instruction to kids who are 2, 3, 4 years behind in reading and mathematics, that's a very overwhelming and daunting task. And so we've tried to lessen the burden of lesson planning for our teachers by providing them a high-quality lesson plan that was written by some of our most sophisticated and master teachers in the network. So
that's all.
There's a lot of resources, and they can still go to it and pick and choose from it, but those are the resources that our lesson design team uses in terms of giving it to teachers.
Thank you.
Sure.
I'd like to talk a little bit about your culture camp and your school culture. So you mentioned culture camp as a way to imbue the students with the culture, and it sounds like a really great idea. I'd like to know a little bit about that program, and also how do you anticipate sustaining the building of that culture throughout the school year?
Marshall.
So I think, and Jason and I have been working together for 10 years now. I met Jason when I finished my fellowship at BES, Bill Nixon Schools, in 2006, and we've been working together ever since. And I think that I'm a big person with regard to school culture. I think that if school culture is going the right way, you can teach anything, and it doesn't matter how far behind kids are. If the school culture is negative, you're unable to do practically anything. I think that most of the school day is spent trying to convince students to not misbehave and so on and so forth. One of the things that I noticed, and before I went to BES, I was an assistant principal in Cincinnati, and I would spend time yelling at kids a lot, trying to help them redirect behavior. I'd walk into classrooms, and because of my presence, I was able to pull kids out and say, hey, what's going on? But we had no system or no science behind how to really begin culture and create good culture inside of the schools. And so I was exposed to schools like Excel when I was in Boston and talking to the founder, Yataka, and Boston Prep and Scott McHugh and those guys, and that whole team there. And they said, Marshall, if you're going to create a great hub, a great school, you're going to have to get your school culture together. And they had what they called boot camps or culture camps. And so I would study them, right? And so when I founded our first school in Cleveland in 2006, that was a huge thing for me, so we created these modules as part of Culture Camp. So Culture Camp now is a week-long process where we don't teach reading, we don't teach mathematics. We have 10 major modules that we want to teach kids. Everything from how to walk in line, how to take redirecting, how to take something, a demerit or being redirected without arguing with the teacher, how to ask for pencils in class, how to ask for paper, how to go to the bathroom, so on and so forth. The systems behind what happens inside of the school, so that this removes all the ambiguity to the school day for the kid. And so the kid walks in, they know where to go, they know how to greet the teacher, so on and so forth. And so arrival dismissal is one of the modules. How do you walk into the classroom from the hallway? Does the teacher prompt you to sit down? Is there a call and response? Where do you place your textbooks, so on and so forth? How do you prepare your desk for for their lesson. We teach all of that stuff to the students throughout the week. There's an assessment system at the end of the week. We expect that the students perform at least 75% or higher on the assessment. And there's a lot of reteaching throughout the first couple of months of school. So when you walk into the building, we get the oohs and ahs from visitors. Like, well, how are you able to do this? Why are your kids able to do this? And it's the first 3 weeks of school. It's because we taught a lot of these expectations up front. And so now for Mississippi Prep, we've created the modules, and the principal that's in our fellowship program has been studying these modules for the last year. He'll teach those to his teachers, and then the teachers will teach them to the students. We'll be on the ground to make sure that the modules are going well. And if they need to we see a lot of redos, what we call redos, like, hey, that doesn't work, we're going to redo that again. Leave the classroom, come back into the classroom, that sort of thing. And it's an ongoing process throughout the year. It's reinforced by morning meetings. So each one of our principals and our deans will have a morning meeting with the grade band. They'll reinforce some of these things that they talked about during Culture Camp. We'll talk about our 3 pillars throughout Culture Camp, and the meaning, the why behind why we go to school, why it's important to go to school, why it's important to go to college, what's the mission of the school, and so the students should be able to chant the mission of the school, and so on and so forth. So all of these things that make up the culture begins to perpetuate itself. Why do we wear jackets and ties in middle school? Our students are in blazers and ties in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. Is that me or you? So our students are in full uniform. We teach them why that's important and why the classroom is hallowed ground and so on and so forth. So it becomes self-perpetuating, and the principal enforces it, the deans reinforce it, and we teach it to the parents during orientation as well.
Another big piece in your application was about Saturday Academy. Mm-hmm. Can you tell us about this component or speak to us about its importance? What happens, who staffs, or how is it staffed? What are the requirements or the implications regarding attendance and absence?
Mm-hmm. So Saturday school is another best practice that we learned over the past 10 years. It just helps us close the achievement gap. We expect our students to walk into the building reading and doing mathematics 4 or 5 grade levels behind. It's not their fault. It's through social promotion that they've gotten to 6th grade and then still reading on the 3rd grade level. But it's up to us to put the brakes on and say, hey, you're not going to 7th grade until you've mastered this content. And if that means we have to hold you back a year, that's what we're going to do. But we employ things like after-school tutoring and Saturday Academy and Saturday School to help close the gap. So between Monday and Friday, there's only so much that we can do, right? We have our scope and sequence, as Jason described, curricula that supports the scope and sequence. But we notice that we think of Saturday School as, I got a pain here in my stomach, right? I can't address that pain Monday through Friday. Saturday School is a particular prescription written for that particular pain, and you show up in Saturday morning. Saturday morning is reading and mathematics from 8:30 to 11:30. It's staffed by the principal or the dean of instruction, and it's taught by the teachers based on the beginning of the year assessments. And based on the 6-week assessments, we rotate kids in and out. So for Saturday School, our first BOY, our first baseline assessment at the beginning of the year for Mississippi Prep, we may have, 40 or 50 or 60 kids in Saturday School based on that assessment, going to school 6 days a week. And then after we find that the students are seeing some success, they may not have to attend. Sometimes we have students that attend Saturday School all year long.
And what about the requirements to attend? What are the plans for students getting to school? What happens if the student is unable to make Saturday School or a parent is unable to meet their
Yeah, we've grown a lot in the past 10 years. When we first started our first program, if you couldn't make Saturday School, that was grounds for expulsion. And we were really, really draconian with that, and we were serious about it. And I think that we didn't really work well with the community doing that. And so we kind of changed a little bit. We still require that they attend Saturday School, but if parents can't get there, it's up to the dean and the principal of the school to get the work to the family, make sure that Saturday School work is completed, or ask the student to stay after school, and then have the families come and pick the student up after school Monday through Friday. We know family happens and life happens, and so we work with our families, but we still think it's very, very important for them to make it in for Saturday School if we deem it necessary.
We're more concerned about the work getting done because the work is the work that's filling the holes in the gaps, whether it comes from us or whether it comes from a responsible adult at home and is turned in on Monday. That's fine. We just want the work to be done.
Okay. Could you share with us a little bit more about your special ed program and how it's managed?
Sure. So when we first started ICANN Schools, we had about 17% of the total network population special needs. And I think we have one of the strongest, most robust special education departments in the state of Ohio, and I'm not saying that because I'm biased. I really do think we have one of the strongest. And because of that, our numbers have increased over the years. So the stories are getting out there that ICANN works really, really well with our kiddos who need special accommodations. So right now, we're up to about 22% of the network total population is deemed special education. In Indiana, it's even higher. We're up over 30%. And so we're probably expecting the same thing down here, anywhere between 20 to 22% school-wide special education if history repeats itself. And so we have a director of special education on the home office that makes visits and supports the principal to make sure that he or she feels okay with being the head of the special education inside of his or her school. We have intervention specialists that are, of course, highly qualified. And in the state of, well, every state is different. In the state of Indiana, there isn't a teacher to student ratio. In the state of Ohio, there is 12 kids per every one intervention specialist. We at ICANN Schools really pay attention to our special education population, and we know that the state of Ohio has said 12 is the maximum, and we've reduced that number to 8 inside of our kindergarten through 8th grade. So we've reduced that even more because we care that much about it, and we've seen great success there. So I'm telling this story to say, even though that Indiana doesn't have a law that says this many of kids per intervention specialist, we made it part of our mission to create a number for our own selves. And our special ed kids are doing wildly successful in Indiana. We plan to mimic that same algorithm down here in Mississippi. So 8, 9, 10 kids per every highly qualified intervention specialist. We also have what we call special education tutors or one-on-one aides. Some of our kids who have that accommodation written in their IEP, we want to make sure that we're providing those accommodations, and that makes parents feel incredibly secure knowing that we're paying attention to what is written in their IEP. Every school is equipped with an IAT team or RTI team. Everyone calls it something different. An intervention assistant team is what we call it. On that team are 5 to 6 individuals: the principal, the instructional leader, the, of course, intervention specialist, maybe a special education or one-on-one aide, a teacher or two, and of course a parent. And when a teacher feels as though a child in their classroom may need special accommodations, we send the team in, we observe, we tell them you need to try these techniques and these strategies, and then we're constantly monitoring to see, are the strategies working? And if they are working, more than likely that child does not have a learning disability, they're just unfortunately behind. And you need to continue to implement these strategies until we catch them up. But there are instances when we do notice a deficit, where we're trying these accommodations and the team makes the suggestion to the school psychologist saying, we're not meeting expectations, this child needs to be tested. And of course, when there's a disparity between what they can actually do and their IQ, then we go ahead and work with the school psychologist to write the IEP. So there's a lot of support mechanisms. We at ICANN Schools are not quick to identify someone who needs special education services, but we always have an eye peeled to kids who are struggling. And I think we do a really good job of identifying, this kid is just behind because they did not receive quality instruction for 2 or 3 years. There's no learning disability. We just got to catch them up. Or this child here has been socially promoted. There is definitely a learning disability and we need to fix it. Or another indicator, this child here has failed once in elementary and once in middle school, and no one has ever raised an eyebrow saying, there might be a disability. here. So we pay attention to those red flags, and I think that we do an incredible job of making sure that we're identifying correctly, and then once identified or not identified, we pay attention to how they're reaching their goals.
And what about your ELL students? How are they reached?
So through the same process, I know that in Ohio, one of our schools has a really larger ELL population than some of our other schools. In Indianapolis, there are pockets of the city that have larger ELL populations than others. Our school is not located in one of those large populations, but there is special training that our intervention specialists go through. If we do enter into a community that has a large ELL population, I think it's up to us working with the principal to make sure that we have the proper staff on the team to assist with those accommodations. When I was a teacher, I taught at an international baccalaureate magnet school in the city of Pittsburgh Public Schools, and I had many kids who didn't speak any English at all. They only spoke Spanish, so they couldn't read in English, and their writing, was inventive spelling in Spanish. So, it's tough to even read an inventive spelling in English, let alone this little one here is trying to inventive spell in Spanish. And so I taught them the same way in which I would teach my students who struggled in reading, and teaching them the letters and the sounds. And oftentimes teachers think that they need a special program, although that does help, and we do have special programs for our ELL kids. But at the end of the day, they're struggling with the same language that our English students are struggling to learn. And so it's kind of almost like a blank slate. And at the end of the year, my ELL students were probably reading better than some of my English as a first language students. So it's special programming, making sure that the teachers feel supported, and then having people on the team who are certified and trained in knowing the strategies that work for your ELL kids.
Okay. Talk us through your enrollment process. We noticed that you have a practice of administering assessments before a child is admitted. Is that correct?
That's not correct.
No.
So the enrollment process, like I described a little bit earlier, it looks like a kind of a campaign, marketing campaign. We get the word out that Mississippi Prep is coming. We walk the streets, we talk with families, we show up at churches and other nonprofit groups, Boys and Girls Clubs and things like that, leaving literature and whatnot, asking families to come to an orientation. So the families will show up, maybe 10 to 15 families at a time. We walk them through an hour and a half orientation. This is what you're getting yourself into, so to speak. We talked about the academic program, our success, the culture of the school, what our expectations are for our teachers and students and families, so on and so forth. After which, the family goes, hey, I like that. I'm going to sign my child up. Then we enroll the students, and then on the first day, during the first week of school, during culture camp, after the student has been enrolled, we conduct a baseline assessment before instruction starts, just so we can start analyzing data, who's going to have to be in Saturday school, and start preparing or modifying the scope and sequence based on what we saw in that baseline assessment.
So that's really helpful. Just so you know, in case you're curious later, this is the statement that tripped us up. There's in your enrollment policy that we added as an attachment. It says, after notification of status and parent orientation, admission staff will review the enrollment packet information and will work diligently to obtain student records. And then it says, ICANN schools would determine whether there's a match between available spaces and interested applicants. So I think our confusion was just about the sequence of that and whether there's a match after student records are reviewed.
If there's read that last sentence again.
As soon as ICANN schools has determined that there is a match between available spaces and interested applicants.
Oh, I understand what that means. Okay, so that's a grade band thing. So in some of our schools, I'm sorry, we're going to rewrite that. So it's available grade space. So some of our schools will fill up quickly in 3rd or 5th grade, that sort of thing. So we'll match them and say, well, in Cleveland, if there's a 3rd grade space not available at this school, we'll say, well, the other school, a couple blocks from here, we have available space, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So,
We do need to
yeah, we need to start there, clearly.
All right. Let's shift gears a little bit, and I'd like to ask this question to prospective board members is, ultimately, you are the ones that are going to hold this charter and are responsible at the end of the day for the success and the performance of the students at the school. So as you're shopping around and thinking about who's best to run this school, I'd love to hear what attracted you to ICS, as well as like how you as a board are assessing their own performance of their portfolio to date.
Well, I know as far I was introduced to Yvonne first through a friend of mine, and then I started looking into a little bit more about ICANN schools, and I think, just to be blunt, what you've heard over the past 45 minutes to an hour here is one of the main reasons why I personally was kind of sold on ICANN schools. There is a rhyme or reason to everything that they do and why they do it and how they do it. I don't see any reason why the same level of care is not going to be put into this Mississippi Prep School as from what I've seen and heard about through all their other schools. And so for me, it was more so of thinking about how can we get this option to Mississippi, yet have a practice in place that's tried, it's true, it's proven, there's a track record. This is not just, hey, let's put a couple people together. Oh, well, he's a principal. He'll be a great principal over here. No, this model has been done. It's been tested. It's been proven in other states. There's no reason why it wouldn't be here. Now, obviously, it's on us as the board to hold them accountable to performing that task of educating the children and making sure that the children are provided for and they're safe and they're being educated. But to be honest, just in the first time I met Marshall and Jason, it was talking to them about these same things, reading about all their programs. There was no stone left unturned and uncovered about ICANN schools. And so I felt very comfortable that at least initially, everything was going to be put in place. There were going to be obviously you're going to have hiccups when you start anything, but if you catch a hiccup, it's not something that they're not going to have seen or not going to not be able to take care of if we do run into an issue. Again, with the fact that they have a CFO who we've kind of brought on board as a treasurer, he knows this budget wasn't created out of Anthony and Janice and Monifa and I just sitting around going, oh yeah, well, we think this is what we'll need for this. This is years of knowledge and practices that have been put in place that we were blown away. I know I was. I shouldn't speak for them yet, but I was blown away with just the attention to detail that ICANN schools had. And so for me, it was sold.
Well, I can say the same thing. When I was invited to serve on this board and listening to this team and studying what they have done and are doing in other areas, it made it more attractive to me. Because again, as I mentioned earlier, the quality of education is important for me, for our students in this area. So it is incumbent on us to make sure that they have the best possible education. I truly believe that the ICANN school model is the best and can really help our students to get to the level that they need to be in. And I want to see our students in the Jackson metropolitan area really take advantage of what the ICANN schools and Mississippi Prep have to offer, because at the end of the day, it's about educating our students. And if I can be a part of that, I'm excited to do that. And again, it's incumbent upon us to make sure that this all work for our students. And that's what I'm committed to do, in holding the principals, the teachers, all of the administrators accountable, and to make sure that we accomplish the goals and objectives of the school.
Jason, you mentioned this is something that you enjoyed about the charter application process is that you were pushed on the quality of your portfolio. And I'd love to ask more about how you're thinking about that now. Now you may have some additional results that have come in from the last school year around schools that may not be meeting the standard that you have set for the organization. How are you thinking about that, and what's your assessment of where the overall portfolio stands to date?
So I'll answer you. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, so I think that, our first year school in Indianapolis, I'll work backwards from our newest school. We had some really, really audacious standards for them. We didn't meet all of them in our first year, but we know why. And I think that was the most important thing for us to learn. I think we accomplished most of the goals that we wanted in the first year at Indiana Prep. But I think that we could have done some things differently with the leadership and the teachers, and we learned. So it's not perfect. We saw those same sorts of things back in 2005 when we started ICANN schools. We opened 2 schools with 250 students apiece, and they accomplished some really outstanding things in the first couple of years. In Ohio, the assessment system switched when we moved from the state standard assessment to the Common Core. And all of the districts across the state of Ohio saw a dip in performance because the test was so, I don't know how to term it, but wacky. They switched the assessment from the park to the air, and so we're going to give the air shot this year. And so I think once we get a handle on what the assessment system is going to be, I think that the numbers are going to look a lot better. It's not that our kids stop learning overnight and our teachers stop teaching overnight. We just have to get a better gauge on the assessment and what the state's going to be asking of us, and I think that's going to work itself out. All of that being said, I think since we would talk with Daisha Told and Doug at Achievement First, we just really admire their model in Common Schools, and one of the things that she would tell us, and even Seth would say the same thing at Democracy. He says, when you start a network of schools, you're chasing this holy grail, and that is how to maintain quality across the entire network with different teachers, different principals, different school cultures, communities, so on and so forth. And it's extremely serious, difficult work. And so we know the importance of having audacious goals for Mississippi Prep, but understanding that it is a first-year school. It's going to have to grow. It's going to run into some bruises and hiccups and things like that. But we've seen a lot, and we know how to change on a dime, and we know how to do what's in the best interest of the kids and the teachers. So we look.
Can you give us like a practical example of what what is the lesson learned from Indiana that you would bring here?
Yeah. So, one lesson was the importance of regular check-ins with the deans. So we thought that, we knew that the principal was meeting with the deans over and over and over again. They have their morning meetings at 7:15. And they have a weekly meeting, so on and so forth. And then the principal would report out to us and say, hey, this is how things are going. When we showed up at this campus, it looked beautiful. The kids in middle school, in our middle schools, you walk in, 6th, 7th, 8th graders, they're transitioning in silence. So they're walking on the line, they're moving straight into the classrooms. And on the surface, everything just looked great. And we stayed there, and after maybe to the 4th or 5th month into the school year, we started to hear about things, but kids are arguing with each other, or they're yelling and arguing back and forth with the teachers. And I'm like, what's going on with the dean's office? How is the dean supporting the principal, and so on and so forth? And if we found that in a couple of our dean's offices, they weren't trained adequately up front. And I think that the offices did not look the way that they looked in Ohio, where there was expectations when the student is sent to the dean's office, this is the protocol that we follow, this is the science. It became more of a come to my office and we'll just sit down and kind of talk and, meet with the dean, that sort of thing. And it was loose. And that was one of the things that we learned. And by the time we realized that, we should have been paying more close attention to that, we were looking at November and December. And as you know, whatever you let slide on day 1 and day 2, you're going to suffer for the rest of the year. And so we spent a lot of time trying to rectify the dean's office and then help the principal hold them accountable for the science behind being sent from the classroom, redirection, and then being placed back into the classroom. So that was one example.
I have a couple. We Indiana taught us to ask principals to think about their job differently. And so a lot of times principals want to know, like, well, what do I need to do? What do I need to read, or what do I need to study in order to be a principal? And a lot of times they want the magic answer. And you guys know this, there is no magic answer to learning how to be a principal, but a principal who is a good principal does certain things really, really well. And so we're asking principals to think about their job differently. So one lesson that we learned that we will implement down here at Mississippi Prep is providing more opportunities for the principal to take ownership over enrollment. So, when a principal is out there with his or her tennis shoes on, okay, and with his or her leadership team sitting at a table, mapping out the streets, mapping out where they want to go because they're densely populated areas of kids, or saying to the team, hey guys, get in my car, we're going to go drive around. Look on porches to where you see bicycles and whatnot. Where do you see kids? They're taking ownership and then sharing that ownership with their leadership team as to where they want to go out and try to attract kids to their schools. Well, we found that prior to, we did that for them. We bought street teams. We got high school kids to go out there and do that. We would, at the home office, put on our tennis shoes and go out there and find kids or attract kids for our principals. And they really didn't take full ownership for wanting to make sure that they did everything in their power to service those kids. Well, when you push down autonomy to go out there your own self and map out the neighborhood your own self and tell the leadership team, we are canvassing every day from 8 in the morning until noon. Make sure you bring your water, wear your ICANN school shirt, and wear some comfortable shoes. We're going out and attracting some kids to our school. It makes it feel like it's their own baby. And when a principal has a school where it feels like it's his or her own baby, they're going to make sure that the deans are doing everything in their power to make sure that they're providing platinum level customer service to send those kids home happy. Because when you send a kid home happy, they want to come back. And then their moms and dads are going to tell the story of the school for you when they're getting their hair done, their nails done, they're out shopping at Target or Walmart. They're going to get kids for you because they're out telling the story. And you're going to make sure as a principal that you're going in and you're coaching your teachers, because a teacher who's giving mediocre instruction is probably not going to be sending their kids home happy, which means you're going to have decreased enrollment at the end of the school year. So that's one lesson learned, involving the principals more with admissions enrollment. Secondly, and then I'll stop talking, is with talent recruitment. So before the home office, ICANN schools, we found, teachers for our principals. Now, there is a level of service that we need to do up here, but there is also a level of responsibility that our principals need to play so that they feel as though they have bought into and have assisted with the recruitment of their teachers. Mm-hmm. So we now don't say, okay, we found you a second grade teacher, here's your second grade teacher. No, we found you 2 or 3 candidates who we think have the potential to do well inside of your school. You need to sit down and take the interview on from here. You need to watch them teach. You need to give them feedback, and then you tell us who you want to be your second grade teacher. So those are 2 lessons that I think have been incredibly powerful, and we will implement those down.
We were actually going to ask about that, so if I could ask a quick follow-up. So conversely, once the teacher is in place, what kind of autonomy does the principal have to, if they don't think that the principal and the site doesn't think the teacher is performing adequately, do they have autonomy to do something about that?
Yes.
Which is?
We'll ask the right questions. Is this teacher on some kind of an instructional coaching plan? What kind of support have you been providing? What are their goals? How long have you asked that teacher to show proficiency in meeting these goals? Do you think that the teacher has potential over time to become that great teacher that you need them to be? So I think it's our responsibility to ask the right questions and then to trust the person that we put inside of the role of principal at that school. And then we'll make sure from an HR end that we have all of the paperwork that's needed to avoid any litigation.
Who ultimately makes a hiring and firing decision at the building level?
The principal.
The principal.
In addition, we also will spend once a month. We fly in and spend 4 or 5 days inside of the building conducting site reports. So in addition to the principal doing informal observations and formal observations, we go in and we sit there and we'll do walkthroughs inside of the building and then talk to the principal about the report. This is what we saw, and these are the sort of things that you need to fix. And when we come back in 3 to 4 weeks, I want to see them fixed.
And then obviously, as the board, the principal and ICANN schools, they obviously all report back to us as well, and we will have, board counsel along with us to make sure that everything is, in line, that we are making the hiring and firing decisions that are proper and won't put us in any kind of litigation or anything of that matter.
Okay. Can I ask the initial question? Okay, so that's so as a board member, how do you manage principal performance as far as between your role and ICANN School's role? So if a specific scenario I'll give you that I would love to hear what you so if you as a board don't think that the principal is performing up to your standards, what happens?
Well, first of all, and we can go down to Janice for this because I know as an educator,
I was going to say
she was about to.
I know. I was sitting there kind of going, okay. First of all, I didn't get to answer Rebecca's question, and I understand we've got a time constraint here. But wait a minute,
you have the floor.
And to pick up on the last question, because that does tend to take a very ominous tone of when a teacher is not performing properly, and this is what we're going to do. And I would hate for that to take an ominous kind of tone, because as educators, one of the biggest complaints that we have is we don't ever get to see enough of our administration. I tell my administration all the time, you are rock stars. We want you in our rooms. When you come in, everybody goes bananas. Bon Jovi has just walked in. You are rock stars, and Nicki Minaj would not get the applause when you guys come walking in. And so we want the educators in our room. When we begin looking at principals and leadership, we want to know, where are they physically in the building? Are they in their offices or are they in the classrooms? And teachers can answer those questions very quickly. And you can find that out very quickly when you look at a principal that cannot name students by name. Any board member could go walking into a school. Anyone with ICANN can go walking into a school. And when you have a principal smiling and nodding and doesn't know Johnny's name and Tiffany's name and Susie's name or anything about what's really going on, that's a red flag of a disconnect. When you have teachers that tell you, our leadership, our administration, our principals, we don't see them. We don't hear from them, because teachers are some of the most passionate people on the planet, and they get so excited about their lessons, about their teachings, about watching their students learn, that they love to have an audience and they love to show off their students to their administration. And so that's usually a really quick assessment to find out physically, where is the principal? Is he involved? Is he in the classroom? Are the teachers feeling supported by this principal? Do the parents feel like they are engaged with the principal?
So if you were to be visiting Mississippi Prep often, as I'm sure that you would, and you noticed, given your expertise, that the principal was in his office all the time and didn't know students' name, he's not. And this is, so you see performance not at the level where you think it should be.
Right.
Specifically with respect to the contract with ICANN and their employment to the principal and your role as a board member, we just want to get clarification on who makes the ultimate decision. And if there's a disagreement between how you think the principal is performing and how ICANN does, how is that resolved?
You want me to answer that, or you want to? So,
Yeah,
go ahead,
Janice, I would love to hear from Janice.
Well, okay. Well, I would probably make a recommendation because we're not talking about a slap on a hand. This is a very serious decision. This is a very serious thing. You would love for it to be a totalitarian decision, that everyone is agreement, that everyone has seen the same thing. And so this is a very serious situation going on here. And so I know that we would all give it a tremendous amount of attention. As a board member, the first thing that I would do would be to contact ICANN and probably fellow board members and say, listen, I'm concerned.
Don't make this
Would you kind of come behind me? Because maybe it's me. Maybe I came in on a bad day. We might need to kind of take a look at this and begin to kind of go, no, you saw the same thing that I did. Now we need to take it to ICANN, and we really need to take a holistic approach to this.
Let me just kind of jump in. I also see it as, from the very beginning, have a clearly defined expectations of our principal, and as well as putting together a performance evaluation. And based on those criteria and some of the things that we observed, then I think as a whole, the board come together and discuss what is the next step, and be led by council as well. But I think after we establish clearly defined expectations for the principal, then I think we move in that direction if that person is not meeting expectations.
No, I agree with both board members. I think that if they see something that they don't think is happening correctly at the school level, reach out and contact us. We'll be meeting with the board. The principal will be in the meeting. ICANN Schools is in the meeting. So we're giving the board monthly or regular updates as to how the school is performing. But if they notice something inside of the school, they should reach out to us. I mean, that's the process. Reach out to us.
Ultimately makes the call to hire or fire the principal.
We make the call to hire and fire the principal. So we'll recommend that. We'll inform the board and say, hey, this is our recommendation for termination, so on and so forth, but only before we've gone through some coaching processes and things like that.
And yet at the same time, if we hear on the ground and we see something that maybe they don't see, we do have, we absolutely have the ability to hire and fire because ultimately they're responsible to, even ICANN is responsible to us. The principal's responsible to them, they're responsible to us, and it's the chain of command, but it's simply that easy. I mean, we would leave it up to ICANN Schools unless we feel like they're not making the right decision, and then we would.
Okay, thank you. Great clarification. Okay, last question on the organizational structure. Does ICANN Schools have a network board? Do you have an organizational board?
We do.
And how does the Mississippi Prep Board interact with that board?
The ICANN Schools has a separate nonprofit, and then we have Mississippi ICANN Schools, which is a separate 501c3, and then we have Mississippi Prep to School Board. So the ICANN School Board and Mississippi Prep School Board don't meet at the same time. Those are two separate independent boards. The Mississippi Board is specifically governing this particular school. ICANN Schools Board is governing the entire network and the mission and vision of the organization.
And what does Mississippi ICANN 501c3 do?
That is Dave, do you want to clarify?
Yeah, it's just
a pass-through for the most part.
Management company pass-through just for Mississippi. So each state that we go in, we have ICANN, and then you have ICANN Ohio, ICANN Indiana, ICANN Mississippi.
So your Indiana school has its own separate board?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And then your Ohio schools, do they have separate boards?
Yes.
Each school has their own board?
Yes.
Gotcha. Got it.
Can you give us any updates on your facility search since you submitted your application?
Yeah, I can speak on that.
Well, with real estate, I thought you would.
So, as far as the update on that is concerned, we've been in talks. We've been in not necessarily full-on negotiations with anyone to this point, because obviously we're awaiting the approval of the charter itself. But we have had advanced talks with both facilities that we've targeted. We have targeted one that will be specifically that I feel fairly certain in my 15 years of experience and also know the individual, that we can come to an agreement with him. And then we've also got a separate location that will be for our second school that we're already in talks with, we're already in negotiations with. And so as far as a true update, we have no ironclad location at this time because there's no need to have an ironclad location at this time. But we do have everything ready. In fact, we've gotten to the point where the location that this school will be at is where we're going to have our hearing, and they've agreed to let us come in, hold the hearing there. They're actually going to provide the chairs and the podium and all that stuff. So they fully know that we're actively pursuing that location, and we are in talks, not necessarily negotiations yet.
And are excited about us considering that community as a potential home for a high quality school, which I think.
And in fact, we had kind of a quick summary board meeting since they were going to be in town last night with them in town, and we actually met because the location for next year will be in the Fondren area. We actually met in Fondren Renaissance Foundation's offices last night, just kind of going on and bridging the gap with the community leaders and just we have everything in place ready to roll out and tackle this whole thing the day that hopefully y'all say yes.
Thank you. So the two locations that we identified in the application are still the two locations that we're looking at. The one on North State Street is the one that would probably be year one because of the timing.
Right.
We're really excited about the year two, the Calvary Church location. Super excited about that neighborhood and the connections there. It's just that project is so big with the hospital and the developer and everything that we know that one has to be year two.
And it has a couple extra steps because that facility is actually on the National Historic Register, so it has to go through a whole bunch of steps that are, depending on who you ask, are unnecessary, but they are what they are. So the developer will have to make Go ahead.
I'm sorry, I'm gonna have to cut you off.
We're done.
We do have another question. We would like to ask about your startup plan. In your budget, you did not include a budget at all for startup. And so we would like to know if you anticipate any financial outlay between the granting of the charter and opening day. If you do not, then we would like to know about the budget that was omitted. How you plan to carry out those activities. If you do expect financial outlay, then where will those funds come from and what is the anticipated cost?
That's a great question.
That's
a great question.
To the treasurer.
So, you heard from Jason and Marshall, and you heard about the fellowship program and, the incubation period that leads up until the opening of school. I mean, that's all on ICANN. That's not a cost that would be borne by Mississippi Prep or charged back at a later date. That's just part of what we believe to be part of pre-development. So we make that investment up front. I believe all the other costs in terms of furniture, other capital needs, technology, all that was included in year one. That would be ordered in July and then implemented in the school for the opening first day. And so that really, when you look at it from that perspective, there's not a lot of other significant startup costs that would be leading up until that opening year, July 1 of the initial year. All the PD costs, in addition to the salaries of the fellowship, the travel, all that is borne by ICANN schools.
Okay. So we have a few minutes left. And want to save some time to talk through next steps. But before we do that, I want to give you all the floor. If there are things that you thought would come up in this interview that did not, or things that you think are important for the group to expound upon, you have 2 minutes to do so.
I think one of the things that we are working on and I'm excited about is the community engagement part and bringing the city together and informing them on what we're bringing to the city and the value and reaching out and forming relationships and and collaborating with city leaders, civic leaders, the faith-based organization, and so on. Really getting the word out, getting the community excited about what we have to offer as a prep school. I think that is key. And even with some of the locations that a couple of locations that we've identified, one on Capitol Street is exciting because it's near the zoo. It's an area, right now it's sort of blighted, but the city is committed to revitalizing that area. And what we bring to that area in year 2 is going to be exciting, going to augment what they are doing. So bringing the community along and educating them, getting them excited about what we have to offer is key in moving the Mississippi Prep forward.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for your time this afternoon. I have recently been on that side of the table, so know that this is not a process for the faint of heart, and appreciate the time and energy that you have put into this process. This particular group right in front of you will be making the recommendation to the board. The report will be delivered on August 19th, so that is when you will know that recommendation, and then you will have an opportunity to respond to that report. The board will actually vote on September 12th. Is when that vote becomes final. And during this process, Marianne will continue to be your primary contact, so any questions or concerns should be addressed to her.
Well, we appreciate y'all's time.
We do.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.